Disclaimer: this video contains spoilers for the original Halo trilogy. There are time codes in the description if you want to jump around. We all good? Fantastic. Now let's start this fight. The year is 1998, and video game developer Bungie is in a bit of a bind. Founded by Alex Seropian and Jason Jones in 1991, Bungie made their mark across the decade with 3 first-person shooter games for the Mac: Marathon, Marathon 2 Durandal, and Marathon Infinity. But after growing fatigued with the shooter genre, they completely changed focus in 1997 for their next game, Myth: The Fallen Lords, a top-down, real-time strategy game set in a fantasy world. And thanks to its success, the team decided to move directly into a sequel, Myth 2 Soulblighter. But the launch of this game was nearly disastrous for Bungie. Right after launch, a horrifying bug was revealed. If you uninstalled the game, there was a chance it would erase your entire hard drive. This was devastating to Bungie, who immediately recalled the game, costing them around $800,000. Press-wise, it was the best option to recall the game to prevent anyone from falling victim to the bug, but on the financial side of things, they were in dire straits. Thankfully, Myth 2 was not the only game under construction at Bungie, because Jason Jones, along with art director Marcus Leto, were secretly working on another project behind the scenes. They believed that their real-time strategy games could be more successful without the fantasy skin. What if Myth, but science fiction? A world where militarized humans fought against mysterious aliens. Jason Jones worked a lot on the programming while Marcus Leto spent his time designing and implementing assets for this new world. The biggest one being a super soldier character, dressed in green armor and a bright orange visor, known only by the pseudonym Future Soldier. The game itself also went through various names during its development. At first it was simply called Armor, then, thanks to Bungie's sense of humor, the name changed to Monkey Nuts, but because Jason Jones didn't want to tell his mom he was working on a game called Monkey Nuts, it was quickly renamed Blam. As time went on, more and more people began to join the project. Shikai Wang worked on concept art for alien vehicles and units, which really began to define the visual look of the game. It was a big action game with lots of troops on the ground that you'd be able to control and send into battle. But the growing team wanted to experiment a bit more with how you'd control various troops. Given that the game itself was going to feature 3D geography, why don't you actually take control of the vehicles and drive them around? Instead of pointing vehicles where you want them to go, you'd be able to take on this zoomed-in, third-person perspective and actually drive around yourself. That sounds way more fun. And surprise, surprise, it was a lot more fun. Within the team at Bungie, the driving was easily the most fun aspect of the entire prototype. It was so fun that people on the team began to realize that this shouldn't be a real-time strategy game. The camera should always be this close. You should always have this kind of control. And so the game's genre changed completely. It was now going to be a third-person shooter. You would control the future soldier running around a big open world with a huge arsenal of guns taking down aliens. In the beginning, the game was purely going to be a multiplayer experience. There was no inkling of a story to be had. But as the team found its feet with the mechanics, a story began to form. This was helped along by the addition of Joseph Staten, who would become one of the lead writers and the cinematic director on the project. Through this larger story development, the team landed on many ideas. The game would be set in the far-flung future of the 26th century. You would play as the future soldier fighting off against an alien religious group known as the Covenant. And it'd all take place on a mysterious alien ring world, an enormous superstructure that'd serve as the basis for all of the action in the game. The sci-fi militaristic skin combined with this new gameplay style made this into a far faster and more exciting action game. Slightly less about strategy, more about pure energy. And this third-person version of the game wound up carrying the team at Bungie all the way to the year 1999. It was here that after around a year and a half of development, Bungie took to E3 in May of 1999 to showcase what they were working on behind closed doors. None of what they showed was available for the public. Everyone in attendance was required to sign extensive NDAs. This thing was being kept tightly under wraps. But word got out regardless. While no details were able to leak, everyone in attendance revealed that their favorite showcase of the entire event was a mysterious new game from Bungie, which gave the team a hell hell of a lot of ground to stand on when pitching the project to Steve Jobs as the next Mac heavy hitter. Yes, Steve Jobs himself, who was super impressed with what the team was working on, specifically the fact that the game was rendering these never-before-seen graphics in real time. I mean, sure, Pixar can render incredible-looking images, but they can't do it in real time, which meant the game was going to be showcased publicly for the very first time at that summer's Macworld convention. This was big. Soon, this top-secret project from Bungie wasn't going to be very top-secret anymore, but that meant two major things needed to be ironed out before a full reveal. For one thing, the showcase needed music. Martin O'Donnell, who had worked with Bungie before, was asked to create a piece of music that was big, exciting, and ancient, all in about 3 days. Martin O'Donnell got to work, joining with Michael Salvatore, and immediately homed in on Gregorian chants to give the music this eerie and mysterious feel, on top of some heavier drum beats and action motifs that had defined the entire game's tone. And at the same time, the game needed a name. Something like Blam or Monkey Nuts wasn't gonna work. There needed to be some kind of official designation. Plenty of names were proposed to fit the bill of this new sci-fi world. You had stuff like Covenant, which was the name of the alien faction you'd be fighting against, but people didn't really seem to like that. Plenty of alternate names were presented, but it was Paul Russell who eventually hit the nail on the head. Taking in the imagery of the alien ring world, he came up with the simple name Halo. And others at Bungie hated it. It was too religious, too ambiguous. I mean, how on earth does Halo sound like an action game? But there was something about it. It captured the mystery, it captured the visual idea of this entire game. It might not have sounded like an action-heavy title, but it was right for this game. And it's for that reason that the name Halo wound up sticking, which all led to July 1999, where Steve Jobs and Jason Jones took to the stage at Macworld to unveil Halo to the world for the very first time, showing not just the first design for the title, but also a 3-minute trailer showcasing the graphical capabilities of the game alongside the brilliant music by Martin O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore. There might not have been any real gameplay, but the designs, the world, the seamless transition from an interior location to a breathtaking open landscape, everything looked spectacular. Bungie was doing things with Halo that had never been seen before in the gaming industry, especially not at this scale. And with this unveiling, Halo became a big talking point in the gaming industry. Insiders were immediately aware of how impressive this was. Halo wasn't going to be like other video games. It was going to be something to really look out for. Halo was on the map. Bungie was on the map. And the gaming industry as a whole was waiting with bated breath to see how this whole thing would shake out. This is where we begin a most exciting journey. A great journey, you might say, of one video game franchise so big and exciting that it wound up changing the gaming industry forever. From the highs and lows, from every challenge to every victory and defeat, this is a complete retrospective on Halo. If you're enjoying the video so far, subscribe to the channel. It helps out a lot. Alright, we got a fight to start, so let's keep this moving. After the turn of the millennium, promotion began to take off for Halo. In May 2000, Bungie made an appearance at E3 to show off 9 whole minutes of footage from their upcoming game. These 9 minutes showed off a squad of human soldiers facing off against aliens on a mysterious ring world. They'd punch through enemy defenses, lose some men along the way, and show off some of the game's action and weaponry. Not only that, but they also showed off a bit more of a horror side to the game, with aliens lurking in the background ready to strike.
Your destruction is the will of the gods, and we are their instrument.
The human forces would nearly be wiped off the board, until right at the end they're saved by an armored super soldier, who pledges that their battle has only just begun. This showcase was joined by a 2-minute teaser trailer that revealed a little bit more on top of that, selling the idea that humanity's last hope in this fight is the strongest, most fearsome soldier of all time. You. Halo made its mark at E3 with an exciting showcase, but it's worth noting that there were some people in attendance who might have wanted to laugh Bungie off the stage. I mean, you're playing as a super soldier with other Marines fighting aliens? I don't know, man, that sounds kinda generic. No one really knew what to expect from the game, but there were a lot of eyes on it, both positive and negative, eager to see what had happened next. But that didn't mean it was all sunshine and rainbows for Bungie behind the scenes. In fact, they couldn't be much farther from sunshine and rainbows. The company was struggling financially. Not only did they have the costly launch of Myth 2 in 1998, but they hadn't released a game since, and they were spending a lot of money on Halo along with their other in-development project Oni, which was being developed at Bungie West. In the most simple of terms, Bungie was going to go bankrupt, which meant that in order to stay afloat, they began looking into an acquisition. Despite the fact that Bungie had built up a very independent, stick-it-to-the-man attitude as a studio, they were probably going to have to become beholden to the man in order to survive. For a while, there was a chance that Activision would acquire them to stay afloat, but that ultimately didn't come to pass. Instead, Bungie's trajectory changed thanks to the involvement of Ed Fries, who was working extensively at Microsoft to create a launch portfolio for their all-new console, the Xbox. That's right, Microsoft was beginning to enter the gaming world, and a lot of people were really skeptical about it. I mean, what business does Microsoft have entering this world? This is Sony's domain, this is Nintendo's domain. Sega's also here, but they're kind of on their way out right now. So there was a lot riding against Microsoft. They needed a solid outing at launch to cement themselves in the gaming industry. And Ed Fries liked Bungie a lot. They were a scrappy little hardcore studio who were making a very interesting sci-fi game. Which is why, after working out some complicated rights issues, Bungie ultimately signed off. On June 19th, 2000, the news was made official. Microsoft had acquired Bungie, taking them out of independence. It was a bit of a shock to the fanbase, and even to some developers internally, who really enjoyed the stick-it-to-the-man attitude, but it was the only way. It also meant that, much to Steve Jobs' chagrin, Halo would no longer release on the Mac. It'd be a launch title exclusive to the Xbox, set for release in the fall of 2001. And with a change of platform also comes yet another change to the genre. Instead of playing the game with a mouse and keyboard, suddenly you were going to be playing with a controller. One thing the developers at Bungie realized with this change was that, when looking at the Xbox controller, the shooting button felt and looked like an actual trigger. So why not double down on that feeling by making it feel like the player was actually holding the gun, shooting down aliens on their own. Once more, the camera was brought closer and closer towards the character, until suddenly the camera was inside the character's head. Halo was now a first-person shooter. That does come with a caveat though. First-person shooters on consoles were widely considered to be bad, or at least they didn't live up to their PC counterparts. Even critically acclaimed games like GoldenEye felt some criticisms on console. Plenty of Bungie's developers felt the same way, specifically Jamie Griesemer, which is exactly why he was put in charge of the first-person shooter mechanics to make sure they worked on console. Aiming with sticks is different than aiming with a mouse. They're not quite as accurate, which can be a little frustrating. So the controls needed to be fine-tuned so that it was easier to hit enemies, but it still felt like the player was in control. The game wasn't taking over for them, even if it kind of was. On top of that, the decision was made to limit the amount of weapons you could carry. Most PC or Mac shooters gave you 10 or so weapons at any given moment to cycle through. You could go into an encounter in so many different ways. But since a controller didn't have a number pad to swap through all those guns, that wasn't super feasible for Halo. Instead, Halo would limit the number of weapons to just 2, a primary and a secondary, which you could swap between with the push of a single button. It was thanks to this that the experience managed to be streamlined. While there'd be a large pool of weapons to choose from, you had to pick 2 specifically to go into each encounter, adding to the strategy. Halo had just gone through its last major change, but the pressure was still on. In fact, the pressure was greater now than it had ever been before, because the launch date of the Xbox was set in stone. It was gonna happen at the end of 2001, and Halo needed to be launched alongside it, which meant there was now a big, immovable deadline for the team at Bungie, which was especially intimidating considering they didn't really have a game yet. They had a bunch of really cool ideas, some cool weapons and character designs, but they had no working AI for the enemies. Any showcase up to that point was heavily scripted. It was smoke and mirrors, made to impress for 9 minutes, and nothing more. But Bungie wouldn't be able to hide behind showcases forever. They had to take all of their disparate ideas and, well, make an actual game. The race was on. The team now had 1 year to get Halo past the bouncer and onto store shelves. As 2001 got underway, the team worked tirelessly to make Halo a reality. The story was being developed, the ideas behind the aliens were being developed, and there was more expansion into the central protagonist, the Future Soldier. Although you really couldn't keep calling him Future Soldier. They needed an actual name for this guy, something that sounded cool but also credible. Jamie Griesemer, Joseph Staten, and artist Rob McLeese were ultimately the three that nailed down the name. He's a Marine, so he's gotta have a naval rank. Maybe he's a commander? But commanders aren't on the field typically. Ultimately, the team found the highest non-commissioned officer rank still considered expendable within the Navy, and that rank was Master Chief. Like a lot of other names, some people internally at Bungie thought it sounded stupid. Halo sounds dumb, Master Chief sounds dumb, but like every other name, it stuck. He wasn't the Future Soldier anymore, he was Master Chief. At the same time, a lot of effort was being put into the enemy AI for the game. Since this was a shooter, a lot of what you'd be engaging with was the aliens you shoot. And this was mainly put together on the testing level known internally as B30. A large island area that you could wander around in any direction and find enemy encounters around every corner. Jamie Griesemer stressed the notion that the game needed to nail its core gameplay loop, a gameplay loop famously referred to as the 30 seconds of fun. For 30 seconds, the game should be an absolute blast. Fighting enemies in different ways, using different weapons, taking encounters in different directions. If you nailed that 30 seconds, that core gameplay, you could repeat that over and over again for a full game. And that's what happened. After working tirelessly, the core gameplay loop finally came together on B30. It was so good, in fact, that B30 stopped being a testing level. It wound up being worked directly into the final game, and the lessons learned from it managed to overlap onto every other level in the entire story. This all led to March of 2001, where Bungie took to the stage at Microsoft GameStock for a huge showcase of the game. For a full 10 minutes, Joseph Staten himself took to the stage, an Xbox controller in hand, and showed off the game in front of the attending audience. For the first time, people were able to see live gameplay, all set on the island level B30, featuring vehicle gameplay, shooting gameplay, all played live on stage. For the first time, people were able to get a sense of what the game could be, and they were able to get a sense of the soon-to-be recognizable 30 seconds of fun. But this was only the beginning. Microsoft eventually did a full unveiling of the Xbox, where Bill Gates himself was joined by none other than The Rock to reveal the console's design and capabilities to the whole world.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. Yeah, I might want to use that sometime, Bill. Well, thanks, Rock.
What a duo. But the console's reveal was only the start. Once E3 came around in May, Microsoft announced the official launch date. The Xbox would hit store shelves on November 15th, 2001, with Halo right there with it. Oh, you think that's a lot of pressure? Just you wait. Initially, Halo was going to be one of several launch titles for the Xbox, but over time, every other title Microsoft was pursuing were falling short. Some games weren't going to be done on time, others were going to be bad, and several games based on Steven Spielberg's movie AI were completely cancelled. Halo suddenly got the spotlight it never expected. Instead of just being another video game launching on a new system, it was going to become the launch title for that system. Halo just became the Xbox's killer app. The stakes were already high for Microsoft to deliver a console that would compete with the immensely successful PlayStation 2, and now that pressure was riding almost exclusively on Halo. It's unfortunate too because there were some chinks in the armor. On the show floor at E3, Bungie allowed players to get their hands on the game for the first time, and it was not the smoothest. While some certainly had their fun, critics noted frame rate issues top to bottom. Plenty of people who were lucky enough to get their hands on the game weren't really able to experience it properly. Despite the ambition and excitement, it wasn't the smoothest first impression for players. Meanwhile, the development cycle at Bungie was tough. Things were coming down to the wire in the last few months of the year, with some major cuts being made to make it before the deadline. Significant sections of the game were removed, and some areas wound up being reused to fill out every part of the campaign. At the same time, the multiplayer side of the game was faltering in some big ways. They had plenty of ideas, but it just wasn't fun. Some even suggested cutting their losses and removing multiplayer from the game entirely. But those in charge of Bungie still believed in the concept, which is why once Bungie West finished their work on the Oni game, they were all folded into the main Bungie studio and completely restarted the multiplayer process from scratch. 4 months before the game's release, the Oni team rebuilt multiplayer from the ground up. At the same time, Microsoft was growing increasingly wary about the title. Like the initial thoughts within Bungie, Microsoft thought it was too religious, too cerebral. It didn't sound marketable. Microsoft wanted to change the name, but Bungie had grown attached and fought back hard to keep it in play. Ultimately, they reached a compromise. The game would still be called Halo, but with an additional subtitle, Combat Evolved. Some people at Bungie thought that was stupid, since it didn't really make any sense, but they ultimately agreed to it. After all, the game would still really be called Halo, just with some added words to make sure audiences knew this was an action game. And over the last few months of 2001, promotion and marketing skyrocketed. For one thing, an entire trailer was released prior to the game's launch, and it was by far the best look at the game's campaign yet. I mean, we got looks at the cinematics, looks at the gameplay, all compacted in a huge montage of action, explosions, and fast-paced gameplay that'd get any gamer frothing at the mouth. There were hints towards the story, hints towards the setting of the game, the mysterious ring world, which even within the trailer is dubbed as Halo. This trailer promised something big, something filled with action and spectacle, and audiences eager to pick it up were more excited than ever for what the game had to offer. One of the most expansive promotional efforts, however, was that Microsoft commissioned Eric Nyland to write an entire prequel novel titled The Fall of Reach. Taking place from the years 2517 to 2552, this book details a lot of the history of the universe that'd go unmentioned in the game, but would serve as pivotal backstory for the game's protagonist, Master Chief, revealing that his real name is John, and that he was conscripted at just 6 years old to be part of the Spartan II program, a program created by Dr. Catherine Halsey to make super soldiers to fight off against human insurrectionists. John, along with all of the other stolen children, would be given genetic augmentations to become the strongest fighters around, all of which through torture and abuse over their formative years. Thankfully, the moral complications of this were dashed when the Covenant attacked, leaving the Spartans to become the strongest line of defense against the alien attackers. John, named John 117 in the program, would become the bravest of these super soldiers, ultimately taking on the title of the Master Chief. It reveals a tragic side to this character, something far darker than what the game was promising, but it was a big step into a potentially larger world. And all of it led to the titular human colony of Reach, a world the Covenant discovered in 2552 and absolutely destroyed, leading directly into the events of the upcoming game. The Fall of Reach is ultimately the very first piece of Halo material ever released, so technically, you could say that Halo is a book franchise featuring video games. You could technically say that. All of which led to November of 2001, the make-or-break moment both for Bungie and Microsoft. They were both fighting an uphill battle, a new game releasing on an untested and unknown new console. The PlayStation 2 was the dominator of the current console generation. Why does Microsoft think they could ever match that? I guess it's time for them to put their money where their mouth is. The time had come for both the launch of Halo and the launch of the Xbox. And people began to turn up. Audiences around around the country began to line up around the block for midnight launch events. The anticipation and interest in Microsoft had grown, and the interest and enthusiasm in this new game was starting to take over. And as people walked out of their stores with an Xbox and a copy of Halo in hand, they now had to return home and ask the most important questions of all: would the game be any good? Would the years of development pay off? Finally, midnight had arrived. The clock had turned to November 15th, 2001. So plug in that brand new console, load up that disc, pick up that controller, because it's time that we finally began this new journey into Halo. The year is 2552. The human colony world of Reach has fallen, and the only UNSC vessel to escape, the Pillar of Autumn, has found itself at this mysterious ring world, with a Covenant fleet hot on their tail. Now you, the Master Chief, you are humanity's greatest weapon. Together with your trusty AI Cortana, you must fight back against the Covenant and uncover the secrets of the ring world known only by the name Halo. And things get started pretty quickly. After a brief tutorial on lower difficulties, you're immediately thrust into the action as the Covenant storm the Pillar of Autumn. The first level of the game is like a lot of first-person shooters right now. It's closed quarters, it's small, it's claustrophobic, you move from one corridor to the next, taking down bad guys, but it isn't long before Halo begins to break tradition. Because once you complete the first level and crash land on the ring world below, things suddenly open up. Gone are the small, tight corridors. Instead, you're graced with a huge open map, large, wide open areas, and a fantastic skybox. I mean, the game looks spectacular. As soon as you step out and you see that Halo ring around you, the scale is just overwhelming. You really feel like a tiny speck on this larger-than-life structure. You see underground caverns, enormous structures, signs of a civilization long past. There's so much implied history that the game only scratches the surface on. You just get to explore these pristine locations that haven't been touched or seen in 100,000 years. But this is no exploration game. While it does slow down from time to time to allow you to take in these larger-than-life structures, this is an action game through and through. And thankfully, the gameplay for that action is a lot of fun. It absolutely nails that 30 seconds of fun, where every encounter lasts for 30 seconds and you can go about it any way you choose. The Covenant are a great enemy to fight. For one thing, the AI is incredible. You'll be going through so many encounters with them, but each one will play slightly differently, because there are so many things they've been programmed to do. The elites are the commanders of the battlefield, and like you, they've also been fitted with energy shields. When you take those down, they might hide behind cover to recharge, or they'll enter a blind rage and charge at you with everything they've got. The grunts have got to be the most iconic enemy you face. These small, stubby little guys with big methane backpacks. Spraying fire on them is always a blast because, well, they're pretty funny. They're all voiced by Joseph Staten, who provides a super high-pitched Weasley voice to these guys to make them as pathetic as possible. I mean, once an elite goes down, the grunts will just go running off scared. Jackals have shields on their arms, making them a bit tougher to get around, but there is a gap for their own weapons, so you just gotta be a little specific about where you shoot, and you can take them out. Hunters are the biggest enemy type, these huge armored creatures that always come out in pairs. The only way to take them down is by hitting them in their weak spot in the back. Just make sure they don't bludgeon you to death. Every enemy is different and every enemy is incredibly recognizable. The Covenant forces are bright and colorful. I mean, elites especially have bright, noticeable armor that separates them from the background but also indicates their rank. Blue elites are miners, the most common type. Red elites are majors, who are a bit tougher. Then there's the gold elites, referred to as zealots, who even carry the energy sword, which unfortunately you can't pick up yourself because it vanishes too fast, but it can absolutely slice and dice anything in its path. But by far the most fun part about the elites in this game is their dialogue options. They don't speak English here, instead they just make a variety of strange and absurd noises whenever they're in combat. I mean, you got stuff like But also they could hit you with a and let's not forget the absolute most iconic Elite voice line in the entire series. It feels like you win the jackpot whenever you hear one of those in the wild. It's great fun. But the enemies themselves make up only half of the fun action, because the other half comes in the various ways you can take down these enemies. While you can only carry 2 weapons at a time, there are a variety of weapons to choose from. The default is obviously the assault rifle. Just spray fire on enemies and they'll go down. You get a sniper at one point to pick off enemies from a distance. A rocket launcher can decimate an entire troop if you play your cards right. But something ingenious about the game is that you don't just get access to UNSC weapons, you also have the ability to pick up Covenant weapons throughout the game. Which is cool not just because you can shoot with enemy weapons, but also because Covenant weapons have slightly different properties. UNSC weapons fire bullets, they fire physical projectiles. While they can do damage against everyone, they have a harder time cutting through shields. However, 2 of the Covenant's leading weapons, the plasma pistol and plasma rifle, are fueled by, well, plasma, meaning they are significantly better at cutting through shields. A full charge on a plasma pistol can take down a Jackal's shield or even an Elite shield. And then there's the Needler, which on one hand is not all that strong of a weapon, but it has to be one of the coolest in the entire armory. The design and concept behind it is just so unique. You shoot these little purple needles at enemies, they can build up a charge and explode if you shoot enough of them, and they reload by sticking out of the top of the gun. And whenever you melee attack someone with this gun in hand, it'll hit them with the spikes on top. It's great. The Covenant don't just have different guns though, they also have a different grenade. Grenades are huge in the combat loop, and super easy. A single button push and you've thrown a grenade into the battlefield. UNSC grenades, or frag grenades, are simple explosives. Toss them in and they'll go boom. The Covenant have plasma grenades, which are quite similar except for the fact that they stick to enemies. These grenades, nicknamed stickies, change up the dynamic a little bit. Some encounters might need a frag grenade, others might need a plasma grenade, and you can flip through both types at any time to change up the combat in any way you see fit. But none of these weapons are a match for the most powerful gun in the entire game, the Magnum. Wait, but isn't that just a pistol? Oh, it is. But it's super powerful. It's actually busted how strong this thing is. Enemies can be taken down in just a few shots. It's one of the few guns to contain a scope, allowing you to do more precision shots. And you know those hunters from earlier? The big guys who seem really intimidating? Well, if you get behind them with one of these, they're dead in one shot. But Halo is not just about fighting guys on your own 2 feet. A significant portion of the game is built around vehicle sections. The Warthog is the very reason this game became a shooter instead of an RTS game. And boy is handling this thing a lot of fun. You can swerve around areas, ram into enemies, 2 NPC characters can even jump into the gunner and passenger seats to help you take on the bad guys. Then you have Covenant vehicles like the Ghost, which has its own built-in weapons, changing combat. Banshees allow you to soar through the air, taking on enemies from above, and the Scorpion tank allows you to just mow down enemies without a care in the world. You become a monster with this thing, which is probably why you only get access to it once in the campaign. All of which help flesh out Halo's combat, allowing the game to be fresh and new at every turn. And it also helps in the huge wide open arenas of combat. No other first-person shooter had these kinds of wide open areas, where you storm up against an enemy army right in front of you. Look no further than the Silent Cartographer, which you might recognize as the test level B30. The huge island that you can run around and fight enemies on all sides. There are a couple things you have to do to progress the level, but the game doesn't point you to one or the other. You can complete the tasks in any order. In fact, you can even skip some backtracking if you do one of them first. Not to mention the start of the level, which sees you storm the island and charge against a horde of Covenant with friendly AI. AI that feels surprisingly alive. Like the enemy AI, the friendly AI is incredibly well detailed. You might be doing a lot of the heavy lifting in combat and you never want to let them drive, but there are so many things the AI could be doing. One of the big things is that they have a huge variety of dialogue options, based on any number of circumstances, just to make the whole thing feel alive.
Watch it!
Oh! I'm on your side! Clean your visor!
The game is also brought to life by the voice cast. The game is led by the duo Steve Downes and Jen Taylor, who voice Master Chief and Cortana respectively. It's thanks to them and the dry humor they're given that this campaign comes to life.
Sleep well?
No thanks to your driving, yes.
So you did miss me.
Master Chief is a man of few words, but whenever he says something, it hits with power. And Cortana embodies your consciousness, essentially, not only providing you with objectives, but being a beating heart to a certain extent. And as the campaign goes on, you interact with plenty of other significant characters. Sergeant Johnson is one of the best characters, and all of that is a credit to the voice actor David Scully. Before he was cast, Johnson was just another Marine. Hell, he didn't even have a name. But once David Scully got into the vocal booth, he started improvising a ton of lines, which the audio team fell in love with. Suddenly, the role got expanded a bit, and this character became one of the game's best.
All you greenhorns who wanted to see Covenant up close, this is gonna be your lucky day.
Then you have Keyes, the captain of the Pillar of Autumn, voiced by Pete Stacker, who brings a bit more of a calm demeanor in the face of overwhelming odds.
Don't keep it loaded, son. You'll have to find ammo as you go.
At the same time, the sound in the game is pretty spectacular. I mean, every weapon sounds powerful, every weapon sounds distinct. The Covenant weapons especially have some very unique sounds that were never heard in other shooters. And the music is top tier. Composed by Martin O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore, the music brings in the heavy hitters. Not only do you have the more action-oriented pieces like the Halo main theme, but you also have a lot of atmospheric pieces that allow you to slow down and really take in the mystery and the awe of the areas. You got stuff like Under Cover of Night, which brings out a calm, groovy sound. And then you have the track A Walk in the Woods, which, while listening to it, might sound like something completely antithetical to the tone of this game, but it fits really well. It's just this nice, groovy little tune that keeps you bobbing your head while you're shooting bad guys. But the real stroke of genius the music makes is how it's used. The music is actually adaptive to what's going on in the game. It all depends on what you're doing. If you're in an encounter with enemies, the music will build up into these bigger, percussive action motifs. But once the combat ends, the action music closes out, leaving you with the slower, atmospheric pieces. This adaptive music was practically unheard of at the time. It was hard to find in most games, but this game paved the way for it to become standard. The way music is used in Halo has impacted the way music's been used in games ever since. Now, all of this would make Halo a pretty great game on its own. Great enemies, great guns, music, sound, characters, but what really brings Halo above the pack is its story. Sure, it might not be winning any Academy Awards, with plenty of quick fixes to some problems, like Master Chief getting teleported to the next location as a quick and inexpensive way of getting from one place to another, or Keyes explaining how he overheard some Covenant guys talking about the ring, which was just a duct tape fix to cover up a cut level.
They call it Halo.
Or even lines like,
This cave is not a natural formation.
wait, really? The perfectly rectangular cave made of, I'm assuming, metal isn't natural? Whoa. But the story is very effective. It brings you from one level to the next with purpose, and continues to dole out the information as we uncover the secrets of Halo. For the first half of the game, you're mostly in the dark. You see these huge structures and your imagination runs wild. There are certain things you learn along the way. You know that it was built by an ancient race called the Forerunners, and that the Covenant believe it to be of religious significance, but that's about it. That is until about halfway through, because after fighting the Covenant for 5 levels, the game pulls out a big reveal that turns the entire thing on its head. Booting up the 6th level 343 Guilty Spark, you immediately notice the clouded and off-putting atmosphere. You're in a murky forest with occasional Covenant troops scattered around and potential figures hiding in the distance. The game has changed its tone on a dime. It was action-heavy before, but now it's dipping its toes into horror. I mean, something is even sending the Covenant running off scared, and it's not you. So you go into this structure to investigate. You find blood strewn across the walls, both Covenant and human. You find this guy who's scared to death of you for some reason, and he'll keep shooting you until you put him out of his misery. Then you find the scene of a massacre, with a UNSC helmet left behind. From that, you're able to view a recording of what happened only a few hours earlier. You discover a troop of UNSC Marines, including Johnson and Keyes, as they uncover a new threat you've never seen before. A swarm of parasitic organisms who overtake them without a moment to lose. You think that's scary? Just think. You're in this exact same room, and those same enemies are about to rip into you as well, which means you have to fight your way back out of the facility, against enemies you've never seen before as they charge, jump, and slash at you to take you down. You have just uncovered the Flood. A race of parasites who will consume any living being and turn them into these zombie-like creatures. They can wield weapons, they can jump huge distances, they can slash at you, anything they can think of in their hive mind, they'll do it. And the entire game changes as a result. Sure, the Covenant are still a factor in the second half of the game, but from here on out the entire story is squarely centered on the Flood, which is both a positive and a negative. The Flood on a story level liven up the whole game in its second half. On a story level, they are absolutely awesome. On a gameplay level, they are not as fun to fight as the Covenant. This partly comes in the fact that there's a bit less variety with them. I mean, you have carrier forms, these bulbous creatures who explode, popping out little infection forms who will swarm you from all sides. Those are pretty unique. But then you have the combat forms, which universally across the board will all charge at you and try to slash at you. Sometimes they have weapons, but there is no variety in their gameplay beyond charge at the player. So taking them out is a bit simpler and a bit more tedious. Grab a shotgun and gun them down as they come. But it's also worth noting that the second half of the game overall is not quite as good as the first half. I mean, for one thing, the last few levels reuse maps from earlier in the game. The 8th level, 2 Betrayals, uses the same map as the 5th level, Assault on the Control Room, except now it's snowing and you're going through it backwards. The 9th level, Keyes, is the same map as the 3rd level, the Truth and Reconciliation, although the ship's a bit more torn apart this time, and also you don't wind up rescuing Captain Keyes again. While you are looking for him, you instead find that he's been completely corrupted by the Flood. So you punch a hole in his face to get what you need. Nice. And the 10th level, the Maw, is just the first level, the Pillar of Autumn again, except now the ship's in disrepair. At least that one's a nice bookend where you see how the crash and the Flood have impacted the ship since the start of the game. But the most damning piece of evidence against the Flood in this game comes on the worst level by far, the Library. Sure, it might be an original map, but oh boy, is it just not fun to play through. Let me break it down. So, you start by traversing these large, dark hallways, and as you do, the Flood swarm you, so you gotta take them down. You continue forward, heading into more corridors that look very similar, and more Flood swarm you, so you have to take them down. Do that a couple times, and you'll make it through that area to a big platform lift. Upon taking this lift to the 2nd floor, you now have to do all of that all over again. In near identical corridors, you gotta fight off wave after wave of Flood. There are some differences, like some smaller tunnels, but they're also infested with Flood. Oh, and be careful turning this corner because some of the Flood can have rocket launchers, and those aren't fun. But after you do all of that, you reach another big platform lift, and upon taking this to the 3rd floor, you realize you have to do all of that again. A whole bunch more identical corridors with a whole new swarm of Flood trying to kill you. At least this time there aren't rocket Flood. That's good. And maybe since it's the 3rd floor, that'll be it. You know, rule of threes, right? But you reach another lift which takes you to the 4th floor, and you realize you have to do it all over once again. Now, at least the 4th floor isn't quite as big as the first 3, and you can simply rush through the last stretch to finish the level without fighting anyone. But man, is this whole level just an exercise in tedium. tedium. Wave after wave of the same enemies, the same corridors, the same everything. Doing it once is fine, but doing it 4 times in a row, you'll likely find yourself getting really frustrated during every attempt, because you will likely die several times trying to reach the end of the level. But, and this is a big but, there is a way to get through the level without dying. Alright, listen, come in close. The way to complete the library on a no-death run is very simple. Set the difficulty to easy. That's what I did anyway, and it was easily the least stressful run of this level I've ever had. It's still endless and tedious, but at least I wasn't mad. This level does further the larger story of the campaign though, because the whole time you're being led through the facility by this thing, 343 Guilty Spark, the monitor of Installation 04, which is the name of this particular Halo ring. And it's through him that we reveal the truth about the Halo ring, its real purpose. It and its fellow rings were built by the Forerunners to contain the Flood. They were a last resort option built to destroy all life in the galaxy. If the Flood breached containment and started spreading across the galaxy, the Halo rings would be activated, destroying everything the Flood considers food, starving them out of existence. In fact, 100,000 years ago, the rings were activated, destroying all life in the galaxy, including the Forerunners. But it appears it didn't quite finish the job, because the Flood is back, and the Monitor, who's been sitting here silently for all this time, is now pushing you to activate the ring and cleanse the galaxy of the Flood once again.
That's not going to happen.
Oh, you know it. We're not just gonna sit back and wipe out all life in the galaxy. We're not at that resort just yet. So instead, Master Chief and Cortana work against the Monitor to destroy the Halo ring, to kill the Flood across the structure, contain the outbreak, and save the galaxy. All of which builds to the final level of the game, where we return to the Pillar of Autumn, all in an effort to overload the ship's engines and cause it to explode. It's a huge climactic level of the game. For one thing, you're fighting Covenant on the same level you started fighting them on, only now these guys are a bit tougher. You're going up against Spec Ops Covenant, with shiny metallic armor and grunts that carry these fuel rod guns. These things are hugely destructive. Unfortunately, like the energy sword before them, they'll explode before you can get your hands on them. At the same time, 343 Guilty Spark is flying around with his sentinels trying to stop you, and of course, you're being constantly swarmed by wave upon wave of Flood. You fight through all of them, you make it to the engine room, and you use a rocket launcher to blow the engines and set them to destroy the entire ring. And just as you successfully overload the engines, you escape in the crowning sequence of the entire game, the Warthog Run. Once the ship's primed and ready to blow, you have to drive in a Warthog through enemies, all on a mission to get to a ship and escape the ring before it explodes. The music kicks in, the main Halo theme takes over and just pumps you up. You're amped up on adrenaline, storming through the Covenant and the Flood, doing big jumps and crashing into every single wall possible. Okay, that last one might just be me, but it's an incredibly exciting conclusion to the game. There's nothing super fancy, it's just driving from one end of the ship to the other. But the music, the speed, the adrenaline, the ticking clock, all of it kicks into gear for this thrilling last sequence. The clock ticks down further and further, more and more Flood swarm around you, until eventually you reach the hangar of the ship, a long sword docked and ready to fly, and you finally take off, escaping the Pillar of Autumn before it fully detonates. And with that, the Flood is contained, the outbreak is stopped, and the galaxy is saved. You've done it. You've uncovered the mysteries of Halo and have destroyed the whole thing before it could take anyone else. Good work.
Halo. It's finished.
No, I think we're just getting started.
Halo Combat Evolved was incredibly well received. Reviews across the board praised the gameplay, the graphics, the enemy and friendly AI, as well as the inventive and refreshing story. Reviews stated that this wasn't just a fun game, but a must-have game for the entire gaming generation. This is the defining title for the Xbox, and despite the steep price tag of a game and a console, it was entirely worth it. Halo brought first-person shooters to console and managed to completely reinvent them at the same time. For the first time on console, a first-person shooter managed to be fun, accessible, and also endlessly replayable all at once. The replayability factor comes twofold. For one thing, the campaign boasts multiple difficulty settings. You got easy, normal, heroic, and legendary. Not only does this change the dynamic of the game, making it a bit harder with each difficulty jump, with Legendary being by far the most challenging mode. So challenging, in fact, that I've never attempted it. I am not a god gamer. But you also get some fun dialogue variations based on what difficulty you choose. Some of the less plot-heavy lines are changed around to give the game just a bit of a different feel depending on how you're going to experience it.
Man, keep your eyes downrange, fingers on your triggers, and we all go home in one piece. Am I right, Marines?
Sir, yes, sir!
Man, we let those dumb bugs out to the middle of nowhere to keep them from getting their filthy claws on Earth. But we stumbled onto something they're so hot for that they're scrambling over each other to get it. Well, I don't care if it's God's own anti-son-of-a-bitch machine or a giant hula hoop, we're not gonna let them have it. What we will let them have is a belly full of lead and a pool of their own blood to drown in. Am I right, Marines?
Sir, yes, sir!
And on top of all of that, if you complete the game on Legendary, you get a bonus cutscene right at the end, featuring Sergeant Johnson and an elite hugging each other as the Pillar of Autumn explodes behind them. The elite even grabs Sergeant Johnson's ass, so, there's that. The other way the campaign becomes endlessly replayable is the fact that you can venture across the story with a friend in split-screen co-op. Two Master Chiefs can be running around fighting off the Covenant together. Getting a Warthog, one can drive while the other mans the turret. Fighting Hunters, one person can distract while the other goes in from behind. Halo can suddenly be a shared experience. But that's not the only way Halo can be a shared experience, because there's one aspect to the game that would keep the whole thing alive and kicking for months, even years after its release. The multiplayer. Completely separate from the campaign and developed by a largely different team, players could enter multiplayer arenas. Across 13 maps and 5 game modes, multiple players could battle each other for hours upon hours on end. You had game modes like Slayer, where the goal is to kill everyone else or everyone on the other team. Oddball, collect the skull and hold it for as long as possible. Capture the flag, pretty self-explanatory. King of the Hill, hold one position for as long as possible. And Race, where your objective is to reach all of the checkpoints on the map as fast as possible. Every match was made even more exciting thanks to the announcer. Every time you got a multi-kill or captured the flag or whatever it was, the booming voice of Jeff Steitzer would pop in to get you all hyped up.
Double kill, triple kill, killing spree, kill-tacular.
Part of the genius also was that every player started the exact same way. Every person was given the same 2 weapons to start. Other weapons would be strewn around the map, so you had to strategize how you traverse the map to get the best guns before the other guys. But playing these modes together wasn't as simple as you might expect. The Xbox wasn't connected to the internet, so there was no way to play with friends across long distances. However, the Xbox could hold up to 4 players at once via split screen, so get 4 friends together and you've got yourself a lobby. But that wasn't all, because the Xbox also had an ability called System Link, which allowed multiple consoles to be connected to each other at once via a local network or Ethernet cable, which meant you could have 4 consoles joined together, each with 4 people, and you could max out a lobby with 16 players at once. This was huge. That might even be an understatement. People would journey to their friends' houses with their Xbox and a copy of the game just to system link and play with as many people as they could. Halo multiplayer sessions consistently brought people back to the game again and again. The campaign was a lot of fun, but there was endless replayability in shooting your friends in the face. That's what kept the game alive and running long after its release, and fans at the time would develop tons of unforgettable memories playing Halo with their friends. Initial sales for Halo got off to a solid start, as some people immediately picked up the game at launch. And once word of mouth began to spread and people got more and more involved in the multiplayer, the game's sales just kept ticking higher and higher. Halo had a strong start and an even stronger tail. It was widely reported that 50% of all Xbox consoles were sold with a copy of Halo. If you bought one, there was a solid chance you were also buying the other. Halo Combat Evolved changed first-person shooters in a number of ways. The multiplayer was able to take off and the campaign told an engaging story. Halo launched an entire console. It put Microsoft on the gaming map. It made the Xbox a ton of money, with 1 million copies of the game sold in its first 5 months on shelves. Halo changed the game. It changed games. And with its success rippling across the industry, the folks over at Bungie had only one question on their minds. How do you top it? A fire was lit under Bungie in 2002. They were riding high off the success of Halo, and all they wanted to do was make a sequel that was bigger and better than the first. I mean, they realized that if you just put together all the cut stuff from Halo 1, you could make an entire other game. Which is why, after 5 months, despite the fact that he notoriously hated sequels, Jason Jones called upon the team and said that their next game was Halo 2. And this time, thanks to the success of the first game, Microsoft gave Bungie even more monetary and creative freedom. They had more money for Halo 2 than they had for any video game they'd ever made. With the money and freedom to do what they wanted, the team set forward to make the best game they possibly could. But not just the best game, the definitive Halo game. Because the plan was that this game would close out the entire story with one big bang. Think how Terminator 2 essentially ended the story. Halo 2 was gonna do the same. There was no intention to make sequels after Halo 2. This was gonna be the big shebang. One of the big hooks for the game was that the team wanted to explore the other side. Joseph Staten wanted to explore what it was like to be the Covenant soldier who was in charge of protecting the ring, but failed. There was a clear intention to expand on the Covenant and make them a far richer and more engaging villain, all by focusing on one character in particular. For a while, this character was named the Dervish, but since that name has ties to Islam, Bungie felt that they might be wading into territory they had no right in. They didn't want the game to invoke any negative connotations, which is why, while the Dervish name was used for a long time, it was ultimately changed to the Arbiter. The new character that'd have a lot of focus in the sequel's story. Eventually, in no time, Bungie started to get fans excited for the future. It hadn't even been a year since Combat Evolved hit store shelves, but once the clock turned to September 2002, Bungie pulled back the curtain just a little bit with the very first teaser trailer for Halo 2. This trailer is very, very simple. We reveal the all-new look for Master Chief, we get a look at a new weapon, all the while messages flash on the screen of each of our accomplishments in the first game's story. All before revealing a battle-ridden world below and the current mission, stop the destruction of the human race. Halo 2 was gonna be coming home. The UNSC was gonna be fighting against the Covenant for the fate of the Earth and humanity. This trailer was huge. In one brief scene, it showed Bungie's ambition. Halo 1 might have been larger than life, but this was somehow going to be even bigger. Given the success of Halo Combat Evolved, or Halo CE, the fan base was able to grow and evolve over the years that followed. And one of the ways fans showed their love of the game was by making videos about it. Videos within the multiplayer engine with characters that could be written and dubbed over to create all new stories. This was helped along by the discovery that if you pointed your character's weapon all the way down, at a certain point on the outside, your character's head would start to tilt back up, with the weapon remaining down. With this discovery, you could have more casual conversations without guns needing to be drawn. And this is where one of the biggest and most influential fan series around Halo came about, Red vs. Blue. Created by the newly forming Rooster Teeth, this series took off online. It was a comedy series featuring two teams of Spartans, the Reds and the Blues, who were constantly at odds, with various hijinks and misadventures they'd have along the way. Red vs. Blue took off on Rooster Teeth's website, and inevitably got the attention of Bungie. It was easily the biggest fan-made project using Halo, and the mutual admiration between Bungie and Rooster Teeth was palpable.
Seriously though, why are we out here? As far as I can tell, it's just a box canyon in the middle of nowhere, with no way in or out. The only reason that we set up a red base here is because they have a blue base over there. And the only reason they have a blue base over there is because we have a red base here.
Yeah, that's because we're fighting each other.
No, but I mean, even if we were to pull out today, and they were to come take our base, they would have two bases in the middle of a box canyon. Whoop-de-fucking-do.
But while everything was sunshine and rainbows outside, with people still playing and enjoying Halo CE, and excitement beginning to build for Halo 2, the inside news at Bungie wasn't quite as smooth. Pretty much everyone at Bungie was a creative person, each with their own ideas about where to take Halo next, and unfortunately, a lot of these groups weren't quite communicating with each other. Management and leadership at Bungie was a bit fractured, with teams pulling the project in different directions because they didn't really know what other people were doing. At the same time, Jason Jones began to work on an entirely different project under the code name Phoenix, leaving others to take the brunt of Halo 2's development. Meanwhile, there was one big flag post Bungie wanted to hit. There was one big event that Bungie wanted to make a big impression at, and that was E3. Bungie had made appearances at E3 before for the first game, but this time around, people knew what the series was, so it was all about proving just how much better Halo 2 could be. Throughout the first few months of the year, the team at Bungie worked tirelessly to create a showcase for E3 that would stun and surprise audiences, providing them with a whole new grab bag of tricks that had never been seen before. Jason Jones described the process and general approach Bungie had to E3 as being like throwing more balls in the air than you could hope to catch. Essentially, Bungie put all of their best ideas into a simple 10-minute showcase. Everything they wanted to be in the game, everything they wanted to achieve. What they were essentially doing was they were making a series of elaborate promises to the audience. They were saying out loud, this is gonna be in the game, which forces them to work as hard as possible to make sure that that thing does eventually wind up in the game. They also wanted to graduate to a new game engine. This time, for the showcase, they were going to use the Stencil engine, which allowed for real-time, high-detail shadow casting. In essence, it made the game look better. The whole team worked day in and day out to create a 10-minute showcase of everything they wanted Halo 2 to offer, and once the clock turned to May 2003, it was time to show it off. E3 had arrived, and Halo 2 was the centerpiece to Microsoft's presence at the event. They had a big billboard, they had a big stage, and people could be let into a small theater to watch the showcase themselves. A few times a day, Joseph Staten would stand in front of a devoted audience of Halo fans and debut the first look at gameplay.
But before we start, I just need to go over some safety regulations in case of fire or electrical storm or earthquake or something like that. Just be sure that you guys are safe.
Stow it, son! These folks didn't wait in line to hear your lips flippity-flap. Knuckle up and get ready to dance, you pasty bastard!
Yes, sir, Sergeant!
And the 10-minute showcase was outstanding. It presented a Covenant invasion of Earth, and you as the Master Chief are the best weapon humanity has to prevent their extinction. The demo shows off all new weapons, some new Covenant vehicles like a Phantom, but the most exciting new additions were the likes of dual wielding, and of course the ability to take over a ghost while someone's piloting it. Fans were acutely aware of the fact that enemy ghosts could run over them day in and day out in the first game, but now they'd be able to take over and change the shape of the battle in an instant. It was insane. The scale was on full display, the action looked great, the new weapons looked fun, the graphics were better than anything in the first game. Halo 2 seemed to knock it out of the park.
Bet you can't stick it.
You're on.
The fan reaction was one of immeasurable excitement. They were absolutely blown away by what they had seen. Some even thought that the showcase was too polished, like there was no way it was actually being played live in front of them. But others visited the booth several times during the day to confirm that the showcase was just a tiny bit different every time. There was only one little problem. It was all a lie. In Bungie's efforts to make a breathtaking showcase for E3, they didn't actually wind up making part of a real campaign level. They instead just made a glorified video. Everything was incredibly scripted, everything was super planned out, and had to be executed at the exact right timing or else the music would wind up playing out of sync. Not to mention, the stencil engine they used for the showcase, while it looked great for those 10 minutes, was way too taxing on the Xbox's processor. Frame rate issues were had all over the place. Using this engine just wasn't going to be feasible for Bungie, which is why they wound up ditching it in favor of just upgrading the engine they already used for the first game. Bungie had gotten everyone excited for Halo 2, but a big problem was lying over their heads. They didn't actually have a game. It just didn't exist, and anything that did exist wasn't fun. Bungie was sent into panic mode. The fractured leadership and pulling the project in different directions had caught up with them. They needed to set things straight, and they needed to do it fast. Suddenly, all side ventures like Project Phoenix were put on hold, if not cancelled completely, to bring everyone at Bungie under the Halo 2 umbrella. Jason Jones was back, every member of the Phoenix team was back, everyone now needed to work harder than ever to get the game off the ground. Bungie had a bunch of cool ideas already, but now it was time to actually string them together to make them function. They had to make a video game. They had to make Halo 2. Thankfully for fans, they didn't know any of this just yet. They were just able to ride off the success of Halo 2's E3 showcase, marveling at its epic scale and new features. And at the same time, Halo CE was given a new release. After 2 years since the game hit store shelves on the Xbox, it was now brought to computers. For both Windows and Mac users, they could now experience the epic highs of the original Halo game for themselves, and also use a mouse and keyboard. The game was fairly well received on PC and Mac. It was a pretty successful port, but people noted that it was a bit easier to play without the controller sticks to get used to. And there were some frame rate dips and some overall quality control issues that might come when doing a PC port, but overall, Halo was on a new platform and new audiences could experience it for the very first time. After the shock of E3, the development on Halo 2 essentially started over. Well, more accurately, it started. The team at Bungie were now working on a wildly condensed timeline to get the game through the door. They ultimately figured that they had 10 months total to make the entire game. At the end of the development cycle for the first game, the team had a few weeks to polish everything and make small improvements. And this final 10% of the development time might have accounted for 30% of the game's success. This is where they were able to iron out all the kinks and make the game function as best as it could. That same luxury was not going to exist on Halo 2. They just didn't have the same amount of time to get things done, which resulted in a far shorter, far more crunched development process. Halo 2 was gonna get done come hell or high water, and for a lot of people at Bungie, it was hell. At the very least, the hours the team were putting in were working out in the long run. Elements of the game that were promised were actually able to start working. Dual wielding, a highly anticipated feature, began to really click together. Taking an enemy off their ghost was finally put into place and made functional in the actual game. And on top of that, the multiplayer side of the game was doing phenomenally well. Under the guiding hand of Max Hoberman, the multiplayer this time got a huge upgrade. While it'd still look and feel like the multiplayer from the first game, the team and audiences had a lot to look forward to with the fact that this game was going to have Xbox Live support. That's right, instead of connecting 4 consoles together with an Ethernet cable, you'd be able to connect with your friends online and play games in the comfort of your own home. This of course was already a pretty big thing on PC, and consoles had tried before with the Sega Dreamcast, but this was going to be something else. In fact, during the development of this side of the game, the team behind Halo 2's multiplayer multiplayer essentially invented console multiplayer as we know it. They allowed for personal customization so you could be recognizable across multiple matches. There was a party system implemented so you could invite friends to a party and consistently join matches together. That was described as being a digital couch, in place of the real couch from the first game. But the real showstopper was matchmaking. To get you into the best matches possible, Halo 2 was going to match you with people of a similar skill set. This not only made joining matches that much faster, you're up and running in just a few seconds, but it also allowed every match to be fun. If you're playing against people significantly worse than you, you're gonna be bored. If you're playing against people significantly better than you, you're gonna be mad. This way, you're playing people at your level, which makes the matches difficult but not frustrating, intense but not maddening. After the glowing positive reviews for the first game's multiplayer, Halo fans were in for a world of fun once Halo 2 would hit store shelves. The music was also being furthered at the same time. Martin O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore re-teamed to write a bunch of new original music that not only spiritually followed up on what they'd done before, but also create a whole new sound for this new story. Specifically, Halo 2 features a lot more rock motifs in its score, and a lot of which was helped along by great musicians who were featured on a number of tracks. Nile Rodgers was a producer for the album and co-wrote a track with an artist named Nataraj. Steve Vai played guitar on a handful of tracks, including an all-new rendition of the main theme. And 3 bands were brought in for some original songs across the game's soundtrack. Breaking Benjamin made the song Blow Me Away, Incubus made The Odyssey, which was broken up into 4 movements, and Hoobastank made Connected. All of which gave Halo 2 an all-new sound that both harkened back to and separated it from the first game. The voice work also gave the game a whole new sound. I mean, sure, you have familiar voice actors Steve Downes and Jen Taylor reprising their roles as Master Chief and Cortana, but Halo 2 was also filled with a smorgasbord of voice talent across every iota of the campaign. I mean, you got Keith David, Ron Perlman, Michael Wincott, D. Bradley Baker, Kevin Michael Richardson, Robert Davi, Miguel Ferrer, and even some bit parts played by David Cross, Orlando Jones, Michelle Rodriguez, and so many more. And as the year continued, the marketing efforts for the game began to take off, and it was a marketing campaign unlike anything else seen in the video game industry before. Microsoft had a mission statement for the promotion of Halo 2. This wasn't just a video game, this was a cultural event, and every bit of promotion fed into that idea. Throughout the whole year, the biggest event in not just the video game industry, but the entertainment industry was the inbound release of Halo 2. Bungie once again made an appearance at E3 in 2004. Microsoft's whole show this year revolved around the excitement of Xbox Live, its recent launch and its promises for the future. And across a 10-minute showcase, Joseph Staten and Max Hoberman took to the stage to reveal what Halo 2's impact would be on Xbox Live. That's right, they showed off a tiny bit of multiplayer, revealing some destructible elements, some new guns, abilities, a new map, and the extremely exciting prospect you'd not only be able to play as a Spartan, you'd also be able to play as an elite. But not only that, after months of speculation and anticipation, the fans finally got an official release date for Halo 2. As tattooed on Peter Moore's arm, the release date was revealed as November 9th, 2004. Only a few months left and fans could finally get their hands on the game they were all waiting for. But while a lot of promotion for Halo 2 was quite traditional, there was one aspect that was entirely unexpected yet greatly rewarding for those paying attention. Given the exponential increase of internet traffic in the early 2000s, some places decided to see how they could use the internet for marketing. They had this new tool. How could you use it in entirely new and exciting ways? That is where 42 Entertainment comes in, a company that was contacted by Bungie to create an alternate reality game or ARG for Halo 2. 42 Entertainment was tasked with creating a Halo 2 viral marketing campaign. The thing was, no one knew it was for Halo 2 at first. It all started when packages of honey began to be shipped out to various outlets, some prolific in the ARG world already. And these bottles of honey contained floating letters inside that, if oriented correctly, spelled the phrase "I love bees." People also noticed that the website URL on the front of the bottles was missing, so naturally the text within the bottles had to fill the gap, leading people to ilovebees.com, a very standard beekeeping website with some images, some information, all the stuff you'd expect. But over time, the website began to break down. It was falling apart at the seams. Clues were listed across the interface. Someone or something had been taking it over. Fans of ARGs at the time were already getting invested. They wanted to know what was going on with this website and where it was all going. But the way the story unfolded was not the way anyone expected. In July 2004, in front of the movies I, Robot, Spider-Man 2, and King Arthur, a 45-second theatrical trailer was released for Halo 2. That's right, for the very first time, a video game trailer made its way into movie theaters. And of course, these were all fairly significant movie releases and a fairly significant game, so there were a lot of eyes on this. The trailer itself is mostly just a cut-up version of the E3 2003 showcase, featuring one new shot of Master Chief dual-wielding SMGs before jumping into the camera. But right at the end of the trailer, when the Xbox logo appeared on screen, the Xbox link at the bottom flickered for a half second to reveal ilovebees.com. This was immediately reported back to the forums looking into the website already. They wanted everyone to know that Halo 2 just teased I Love Bees. At first, no one believed this. I mean, it just sounded way too unbelievable of a concept. Halo 2 teasing I Love Bees? Come on. But over time, as more and more people viewed the trailer, and especially when it made its way online, there was no denying it. I Love Bees wasn't just an average ARG, it was directly promoting Halo 2. The story really began to unfold from here, as it was revealed that the website had been taken over by the damaged AI Melissa, an AI serving on a UNSC ship in the year 2552. Somehow she had fractured into multiple pieces and traveled back in time to 2004. Here she was being pursued by another AI program hell-bent on destroying her, which meant that everyone involved had to piece together the story as best as they could to help Melissa out. The biggest turning point came on August 24th, 2004. A few days before this, a huge series of coordinates were listed. 210 locations across the United States, complete with a countdown. Participants from across the country traveled to each location, where they'd eventually find payphones. Payphones that'd suddenly ring once the countdown hit 0. Participants had to answer the phone, provide specific keywords that they had acquired through the website to prove their identity, and through doing that, they'd unlock an individual audio log featuring each of the important characters in the story. All in all, there were 777 audio logs to unlock. And while it took a bit of time, the participants managed to unlock each and every one of them, being able to fully piece together the entire story. How Melissa wound up in the past, and ultimately how, thanks to each of the participants, she was able to reassemble herself and launch back to 2552. Just in time to be met face-to-face with a Covenant invasion of Earth, the event that kickstarts the story of Halo 2. This was insane. Participants were absolutely wrapped in this story, from its honey-like beginnings to its extraordinary twists and sci-fi ending. Participants ultimately named themselves the Beekeepers, the ones who loved bees just as much as the website did. And as a reward for unlocking all 777 audio logs, the Beekeepers were invited to several movie theaters across the country to get a hands-on impression of Halo 2. They got to play the game before anyone else. It was awesome. Couple that with a DVD featuring every audio log in one 5-hour package, and you really had it all. The I Love Bees viral marketing campaign was one of the most unique aspects to Halo 2. It encouraged investigation, participation, travel, all sorts of stuff that made the fanbase not just viewers of the story, but active participants in the ongoing world. Across its run, it said that 3 million people participated around the world. 3 million beekeepers. You love to see it. And in the end, it's a marketing campaign that they won't soon forget. One of the most exciting things in an already exciting year for Halo. And while I Love Bees might have reached its end, the excitement for Halo 2 wasn't stopping anytime soon. Across October and November 2004, television trailers were aired, giving audiences some of the best looks at some new villains, new vehicles, and overall the best look yet at the new story this game was gonna tell. All of which helped in getting the word out on the game as audiences geared up for their imminent return to this world. The anticipation for Halo 2 was unmatched. Fans were more excited than ever. It seemed all anyone could talk about at the time was this game's debut. But while the fan base and audiences at large were super pumped for the game's launch, Bungie was still facing an immeasurable crunch to get the game through the door. The deadline was approaching faster and faster. The days were flying by as the team worked around the clock to get everything done in record time. There was no time to really digitally create and map out certain environments before implementing them into the game, so levels were being designed on whiteboards, and that's the only place they ever existed. What was on the whiteboard was law, and if it was erased, that's it. It's gone now. The pressure of Halo 2 was really starting to get to the team by this point. I mean, we're talking 7-day weeks, 80 hours a week, people are sleeping in the office, relationships are being fractured, people aren't seeing their families, they weren't even really seeing the sun. Plenty of people internally at Bungie began to refer to this as the death run. And that was true almost literally. The amount of hours the team was working, if it continued for a long enough amount of time, people might just start dropping. The team was essentially killing themselves to get the game done on time. And there was no moving the release date. This was going to be the last year of the Xbox's lifespan. A new console was going to hit the market in 2005, so this game needed to come out now to give the original Xbox some life in its final year.
7 days a week is tremendously hard. It's a cool thing to be part of, and Halo 1 wouldn't have been what it was if we hadn't done that, and this game sure wouldn't be what it is going to be if we had worked 8 hours a day, and maybe that sucks because we didn't plan right, and maybe there's a way to do it all on the 9-to-5 schedule, and maybe one day we'll even find that, but it's sure not the way it's going to be this time.
But if all of that wasn't painful enough, the closer the team got to the deadline, the more they realized that their ambition for the game was far beyond what they could actually achieve. The team had to make a lot of painful decisions in the last stretch. Entire levels needed to be cut, with everything else duct taped back together with cutscenes. And then came the biggest and most devastating cut of all. The original plan for Halo 2's story was that it was going to take place over 3 major acts. The first act would take place on Earth, seeing the Covenant invade. The second act would send things back into space. And the third act would bring it all back to Earth for the grand finale. That third act was going to consist of about 3 levels, but everyone at Bungie realized they just didn't have the time to make those 3 levels. Things were storyboarded, things were planned out, but the team was far too stretched on every other level that making 3 more was an impossibility. They realized that they couldn't make the third act, which is why the immensely difficult choice was made to cut the third act entirely. Those last 3 levels were left behind, and the team focused all their energy on the remaining levels, all to make sure they were functional and fun to play. It was a hard choice to make, but one that ensured the game would actually be able to release on time. And thanks to these last-minute cuts and compromises, the game was finally finished. Bungie reached the end of a hugely tumultuous and stressful road. After 10 months of some of the most grueling work the team at Bungie had ever experienced, they had reached the finish line. Halo 2 was complete. Which meant the time had come for fans to get their hands on it. And boy, was the launch for Halo 2 a huge deal. Microsoft's intention to make this a cultural event completely paid off. Stores across the country were lined up around the block for the midnight release. There was a huge event at Toys R Us in Times Square, a massive countdown overlooking the area, trailers for the game playing constantly. Halo 2 made headlines across the news for being one of the most anticipated properties in entertainment history. For the first time, a video game had made its mark on the world in the same way movies had been doing for decades. News reports were aired, jokes were made on late-night shows. It was insane.
Now, I understand there's a few more states to put in the red and blue columns. We're going to go back to the map and Rob Corddry. Rob, looking at the... Rob.
Yeah! Yeah! Suck it! Suck it! Where's your alien plasma rifle now, bitch?
Rob! Rob! Oh! Are you playing Halo? No?
And thanks to this insane hype and overwhelming midnight events, Halo 2 ultimately had a bigger opening day than any piece of entertainment media ever. Across its first 24 hours, Halo 2 sold 2.4 million copies, making $125 million, which is more than any movie had ever made over its opening weekend up to that point. And this was across two distinct versions you could buy. You could either buy the standard Xbox copy of the game, or you could take home the limited collector's edition, which came with 2 discs. The first disc was obviously the game itself, but the second disc featured a behind-the-scenes documentary, some video featurettes, some concept art and early ideas, all sorts of stuff for Halo fans to dive into while journeying through the game itself. This was huge. This was intense. Fans around the country, around the world, had shown their support and excitement for the game. And once they got through the huge lines and excitement at every store, there was only one thing left to do. It was time to slide that disc into the Xbox and finally start playing the game for themselves. The clock had now turned to November 9th, 2004. I hope you're ready, because the Covenant are invading Earth, and you, the greatest super soldier known to man, you're the only one who can stop it. This game does what I think all good sci-fi sequels can do. It takes the world already established and blows it wide open. The first game told a pretty simple story about uncovering the truth about the Halo ring and fighting aliens along the way. It was a very one-sided story, seeing the Master Chief take on the Covenant and the Flood all on a mission to destroy the ring. But this game tells a far more complex story with interweaving plot lines and characters. The surprises come from minute 1, because the game does not immediately open with the Master Chief. Instead, we see this guy, Thel Vadami, an elite commander, get punished for his failure to defend the ring. Not only do the elites suddenly speak English now, with this one being voiced by the legendary Keith David, but we explore the deeper inner workings of the Covenant, their hierarchy, their beliefs. The Covenant are not just an army, they're a religious group, believing that the Halo rings will take them on a so-called great journey. They're led not by warriors, but by the 3 prophets, the prophet of truth, the prophet of mercy, and the prophet of regret. And we realize just how devastating it was for us to have destroyed the ring last time, because now Thel Vadami is taking the fall, branded as a heretic to the Covenant.
Soon the great journey shall begin. But when it does, the weight of your heresy will stay your feet, and you shall be left behind.
And during one of the opening cutscenes, we cross-cut between Thel Vadami's punishment and a scene back on Earth with the Master Chief and Sergeant Johnson being rewarded for heroism. We're just immediately juxtaposing the two sides' reaction to the events of the last game. Halo 2 uses a lot more cinematic language. It's clearly attempting to look and feel a lot more like a movie. What with the shot choices, cross-dissolves, cross-cutting between two sequences. The first game was good fun, but this one is far more invested in telling a grand story about this world and about these characters. But don't fret, we don't spend too long with cutscenes. Soon enough, you're thrust into the action as Master Chief, as the Covenant have suddenly begun a bombardment on Earth. The action kicks off with no time to waste. You get reintroduced to the gunplay, the music, the enemies, everything's back from Halo 1 with a fresh new coat of paint, combined with some storytelling interspersed in the levels. I mean, we see fellow UNSC space stations get destroyed in the distance, and the first big level, Cairo Station, ends with a huge blockbuster of a cutscene. The whole level centers around a Covenant bomb on the station, and at the very end you manage to disarm it, but that's not all the Master Chief has in mind.
Sir, permission to leave the station.
For what purpose, Master Chief?
To give the Covenant back their bomb.
Permission granted.
You thought Master Chief was cool before? Well, now watch as he drops a bomb out of the station, flies with it through space, infiltrates a Covenant warship, rearms the bomb, and escapes just as it explodes, destroying the Covenant ship. Sure, you don't get to do any of that yourself, but you do get to watch slack-jawed as Master Chief becomes a hugely over-the-top yet incredibly awesome hero.
Just one question. What if you miss?
I won't.
This game is a blockbuster. It's the gaming equivalent to a blockbuster action movie. The scope and scale is huge, the storytelling is on another level, and like the first game, it's a lot of fun to play. Once again, the gunplay is fantastic. While the assault rifle from the first game doesn't make an appearance, it's replaced with 2 heavy hitters. The battle rifle, which not only has a scope, but shoots 3 shots with every trigger pull. Then there's the SMG, which can mow down enemies without remorse. But just one SMG isn't enough. How about you carry 2 at a time? Because pretty much every small weapon can be dual wielded in any combination. And once you got 2 weapons in your hands, you become a monster on the battlefield. You're just an unstoppable juggernaut. Now there are some downsides to dual wielding. For one thing, in order to have 2 weapons be balanced, each individual weapon is kinda nerfed. In order to not be overpowering as a pair, they have to be weaker as individuals. At the same time, dual wielding also takes away the ability to throw grenades, and since so many weapons can be dual wielded, you'll spend a lot more time with that than with grenades. But a lot of that is down to personal preference. I personally really enjoy dual wielding, getting 2 guns in your hand, cutting down enemies. It's a lot of fun, and it's added to by facing off the same great enemies from last time. You got the elites, you got the grunts, you got the jackals, hunters make a comeback, but they're also joined by some new friends. I mean, you got these bug things called drones that fly around all the time. You even have sniper jackals, who hide in the shadows to snipe you from a distance. You can barely see them, but on higher difficulties, they can one-shot you. These guys ultimately became the scorn of every single Halo player for years to come. The AI is still top tier, with the Covenant given plenty of variety in what they can do, making every encounter interesting. Friendly AI also gets a bit of a boost, with even more dialogue options to make them feel alive, and even some dialogue options to comment on my ability as a gamer. Vehicles are also back. I mean, we got the Warthog, allowing you to traverse the area with a couple AI friends, and there are 2 big instances where you get your hands on a Scorpion tank. The second instance even brings back the musical track from the first game, A Walk in the Woods, this time titled Heretic Hero. Skyboxes are also top tier this time around. Like the first game, you can just stare out into the sky and feel the absolute scale of every area. The Earth City of New Mombasa is huge, what with the looming towers and massive Covenant warship overhead. The Cairo station is also immense. It even carries some animation with it, as you see the Mac gun at its center going off during the level. We even see an all-new Covenant vehicle in this game, the Scarab, this huge 4-legged walking artillery that barrels through the city. Throughout the New Mombasa levels, you see this thing trampling over the landscape. You see it blowing holes in the ground, you see it nearly stepping on you to get to another level, I mean. And the climactic moment of the New Mombasa levels sees you finally infiltrate the Scarab and kill everyone inside. There is a distinct lack of polish to the Scarab, however. For one thing, it's entirely scripted. It goes on a set path that is identical every time you play the game. But then there's also the question of, how do you stop it? And the answer is not super clear. At a certain point, the Scarab stops moving, so you have to get inside, kill the drivers, kill some other elites, even some grunts, and then smash cut to a cutscene where the thing's blowing up. Did I do that, or? I still think it's a fun set piece, but there are chinks in its armor.
That's right, you mothers! Run!
Halo 2 also features a bevy of supporting characters that we engage with throughout the campaign. Sergeant Johnson from the first game is given quite the expansion, with David Scully able to provide a whole bunch more to this character over the campaign. We also have the newcomer Miranda Keyes, the daughter of Captain Keyes from the first game, who, fun fact, was originally going to betray the Master Chief as revenge for what happened to her father in the last game. That was one of Jason Jones' biggest ideas going into Halo 2. Ultimately, it didn't happen. Miranda Keyes keeps it strictly professional, but it's something to think about. Then we have Lord Hood, one of the highest ranking officers of the UNSC, and with a voice by Ron Perlman, the power he has over the forces is quite incredible. And on top of all of that, we're also joined by new ground troops, Orbital Drop Shock Troopers, or ODSTs. They're not as strong as Spartans, but they can kick Covenant ass like the best of them. The sound is fantastic, with each new weapon given enough punch and power. Hearing both the grunts and elites speak English during combat is a lot of fun. Sure, we miss out on the warts of the last game, but there's plenty of great stuff in their place. And once again, the music is fantastic. Michael Salvatore and Martin O'Donnell have once again come through with some great tracks. There are some great action-heavy pieces in here, some great little groovy pieces that add to the unique tone and fun of the game. There's lots of atmospheric work, but on top of all of that, there's also a bit more of an emotional side to the score this time. The game is at one point about the big action and big spectacle, but it also dives deeper with these characters. And nowhere is that more apparent than in the track Unforgotten, which is a far more emotionally charged and somber track that gets more at the heart of these games. This game's story kicks off with, as promised, a massive Covenant invasion of Earth. A force of ships have amassed at the planet and have punched their way down to New Mombasa, all of which is led by the Prophet of Regret. But he has apparently jumped the gun a little bit. Adding to the Covenant side of the story, he didn't believe there'd be any opposition on Earth, so he decided to dive in before anyone else got the chance. Of course, Earth is filled with humans, UNSC soldiers, and the Master Chief, so now it's your job to take him down. But despite this all being a huge part of the marketing, it was essentially sold on the fact that Earth was being invaded and you have to stop it, that's really only how the game starts. It isn't long before you and the Covenant leave Earth through a slipspace portal, though not before making a big mess on your way out. The Earth side of the story is only the first act, because after this you dive into space, discovering, you guessed it, another Halo ring. The last one was Alpha Halo, and this one is Delta Halo, Installation 05. Which means the conflict once again centers around a fight against the Covenant to stop the activation of the ring. Only this time we know that it's all in service of their great journey. You blast through Covenant forces, you take this big gondola across a giant lake, you even see the arrival of the full Covenant fleet above the ring, complete with their Holy City High Charity. Once again, the scale is off the charts. And this whole bit concludes your hunt for the Prophet of Regret, because once you find him, you punch him to death. What an awesome boss fight. You just climb on that chair and beat an old man to death with your fist. Incredible. But that is really only half of the game's story. Like I said, there are interweaving stories going on here that are far more complex than anything in the first game. Because while Master Chief heads off to Delta Halo to stop the Covenant, we also revisit Thel Vadami, the heretic who lost the first ring. We get this incredible cutscene letting us into even more about the Covenant. We learn even more about their hierarchy, and specifically, we learn about the role of the Arbiter, an elite who takes on deadly tasks that no one else can face. And since Thel 'Vadamee is branded as a heretic, no longer able to command ships as he is granted the role of the Arbiter, to lead troops into the most dangerous of battles.
What of the Council?
The tasks you must undertake as the Arbiter are perilous, suicidal. You will die, as each Arbiter has before you. The Council will have their corpse.
God, this dude's really interesting. We got so many great and quotable lines from him. We understand his psyche, we empathize with him and his plight. We're even introduced to some other characters alongside him, like the Shipmaster, a battle-hardened elite voiced by Robert Davi, who helps flesh out this side of the story even more.
You are the Arbiter, the will of the prophets. But these are my elites. Their lives matter to me, yours does not. That makes two of us.
It's gonna make for a really interesting showdown. We're seeing all these cutscenes with the Arbiter. Eventually it's gonna hit hard once we have to face him off at the end. But we're gonna have to cut away now. The Arbiter's been sent on his mission, so now we've gotta leave this and go back to the Master Chief.
Warriors, prepare for combat.
Whoa, wait, what? Are you telling me that we're playing as the Arbiter? Just like the first game, this one brings out a game-changing twist partway through. I mean, this is the 6th level of the game and we've already split narratives from Master Chief. We're the Arbiter now, playing a whole new side to the story, fighting alongside the Covenant instead of against them. I, for one, think this twist is awesome. It's a huge surprise when suddenly you start playing as this guy. It's not just about exploring him through cutscenes and stuff, it's about putting you in his shoes and fighting his battles yourself. And through that, you get a whole new library of weapons to choose from. I mean, for one thing, you now finally have access to the energy sword, which can be used to slash at enemies and even lunge at them for a big charged hit. The fuel rod gun from the first game is also playable now, allowing you to launch green projectiles at enemies. Then there's the Covenant carbine, which can blast enemies from quite a ways away. The beam rifle is a long-range sniper, so you can use the Sniper Jackal's greatest asset against them. And of course, there's still dual wielding. The most destructive weapon to dual wield has to be the Needler. I mean, once you get 2 of these guys in your hands, you just become a lawnmower. They're so powerful in these levels. There are also vehicles you get access to, like the Ghost, of course, the Banshee that can fly through the area, and even a Wraith tank. You could only fight these things on the first game, but now you could take them over and roll across the battlefield without remorse. A lot of this is to fight off against a group of heretics who have broken off from the Covenant, and while they do feature the same enemy types as the Covenant, they're visually distinct enough to stand apart so you know who you're supposed to be shooting at. The heretics are also joined by the returning 343 Guilty Spark. The whole reason they are heretics is because Guilty Spark revealed the truth to them about the Halo rings. They are not devices that will send the Covenant to the Divine Beyond. They're super weapons meant to destroy. Ultimately, a large part of the Arbiter's story is him grappling with the things he learns about the rings, the things he learns about the Covenant. He's already an outcast to a certain extent, so should he still put his faith into the Covenant? But that's only part of the Arbiter's story here, because through his eyes we also see a huge change within the Covenant ranks. Thanks in part due to the events of the last game and the death of the Prophet of Regret here, the remaining prophets lose faith in the elites.
But recent events have made it abundantly clear that the elites can no longer guarantee our safety.
Instead, the all-new enemy type, the Brutes, take over as the Covenant's main ground troop, led by Tartarus, which not only makes the Brutes an adversary you fight during the campaign, but it also leads to a Covenant civil war. There's outrage within the ranks, elites and Brutes fighting each other, ships blowing each other out of the sky, and oftentimes you're caught in the middle of this. You can just watch as elites and Brutes fight each other to the death. It's probably even smarter to just hang back and let them kill each other, you know? Unfortunately, during combat, the brutes are not as fun to fight as the elites. They're more or less bullet sponges. You just gotta keep shooting until they go down. There isn't as much strategy there. The most interesting thing they do is that the last of the pack will enter a charging rage, which puts you on your toes. They do have some new weapons though, 2 in fact. You have the brute shot, which launches grenades into the air, that's fun, and you have the brute plasma rifle, which is ultimately the exact same as a regular plasma rifle, except it's red and shoots a bit faster. But there's one more level on all of this. One more level to the story on top of every other thread going on here. And that's the fact that this game also sees the return of the Flood. They were the big twist reveal in the last game, and there was once again a bit of build-up to their return here. But they're not quite as dominating of a force this time. In the first game they pretty much became the sole focus of the story in the second half. But here they're just another piece to this proverbial pie. Once again, though, they're still not quite as fun to fight as the Covenant. They still mostly just charge at you and you have to gun them down with the shotgun. There are a couple bonuses, like the fact that there isn't really a library equivalent here. At least there isn't a level quite as long or tedious. Although there is a moment where you go to Installation 05's library. It's only a brief moment, but the geography is instantly recognizable. The nightmares are instantly remembered. The individual combat forms of the Flood are a bit stronger this time. They're harder to take down, which is made a bit worse when you realize that the shotgun that was so effective at cutting them down last time is significantly weaker here. At the very least, Forerunner Sentinels make a reappearance, and while they do fire at you just as much as they fire at the Flood, you can get access to their Sentinel Beam. The most effective weapon the Sentinels have against the Flood is now in your arsenal, and that's great. The Sentinels are even joined by the new Enforcer Sentinels, these big machines that will absolutely try to ruin your day to protect the ring. There is one aspect of the Flood here, though, that is very interesting. In the game's efforts to expand on the entire universe, we also see the controlling hive mind of the Flood, this giant worm monster known as the Grave Mind. It's something so big and so full of Flood that it has grown its own intelligence. It's able to speak, it's able to bring together both Master Chief and the Arbiter to unite them in the final stretch of the game. It's big, it's grotesque, and with a voice from D. Bradley Baker, the Gravemind not only has a personality, but a commanding presence over its incredible cutscene.
Your prophets have promised you freedom from a doomed existence, but you will find no salvation on this ring. Those who built this place knew what they wrought. Do not mistake their intent, or all will perish as they did before.
And it manages to thrust us into the final set of levels, throwing Master Chief and the Arbiter to 2 separate locations, each with the goal of trying to stop the activation of the Halo Ring and the annihilation of the galaxy. Master Chief journeys to High Charity, the Covenant Holy City, which is an incredible location. I mean, once again, the skybox is crazy. You can just stare out and look at it for hours. And that thing in the middle there, that's where the Prophet of Truth is heading, because that thing's a Forerunner spaceship, and the Prophet wants to take it to Earth to finish the invasion that prematurely began at the start of the game. We also spend our time here not only watching as the Covenant break down in a civil war, but we also see the Flood infiltrate and begin to take over High Charity. The In Amber Clad, a UNSC ship, crashes within High Charity, unleashing a whole plague of Flood. They even kill the Prophet of Mercy, leaving Truth as the sole leader of the Covenant going forward. As we wander the ship, we slowly see flood spores and tendrils take over. Rooms that were once pristine are now being broken down and torn apart. And since the threat of the Flood is back, along with the threat of another ring activating, Cortana elects to stay behind on High Charity, to ignite the In Amber Clad's engines and destroy the ring just like last time. All the while, Master Chief has to rush off towards the central Forerunner ship and stop Truth as he makes his way to Earth.
You get to Earth, good luck.
After I'm through with Truth,
You'll make a girl a promise. If you know you can't keep it.
On the other side, we see the conclusion to the Arbiter's arc in this game. Over the course of this story, he's grown more and more disenfranchised with the Covenant. He, along with the other elites, were betrayed by the Brutes and the Prophets. And since coming into contact with the Gravemind, he begins to learn the truth about Halo. Which means you, as the Arbiter, must rush across Delta Halo to try and stop Tartarus from activating the Ring. You become an active participant in the Covenant Civil War, which leads to some great gameplay moments like rushing into battle alongside other elites, grunts, and even hunters at one point. Having those guys on your side is so sick. You even join forces with Sergeant Johnson, flying through the air in a Banshee as he traverses the ground in a Scarab. It's great. And it all leads to one big showdown with Tartarus. The Halo Ring is being activated, and you must work with both Johnson and Miranda Keyes to stop it and take Tartarus down. And this boss fight isn't the greatest. I mean, the brutes lack a lot of polish, that's for sure, but also the rules for fighting Tartarus are a little unclear at first. A new player might not really understand exactly how to fight Tartarus. It takes you a moment to realize that this glowing aura around him is a shield, and you have to wait until Johnson snipes at Tartarus for the shield to go down. Then, and only then, should you go guns blazing on Tartarus. It's not impossible to figure out, but it can be confusing at first. Ultimately, you're able to take Tartarus down, and alongside that, Miranda and Johnson are able to stop the activation of the ring. Whew, crisis averted. Unfortunately, it's not the only crisis, because it's revealed by 343 Guilty Spark that when a ring's activation is stopped prematurely, it sends a signal to the other rings to go on standby mode, meaning every ring is now ready for remote activation.
Where would someone go to activate the other rings?
Why, the Ark, of course.
And where, Oracle, is that?
Cut to the Forerunner ship arriving on Earth, with Master Chief inside. Oh boy, every ring's on standby, the Prophet of Truth is heading to Earth to continue the invasion, with Master Chief still inside. We're getting all set up for a Grand Slam finale. Here we go.
Master Chief, you mind telling me what you're doing on that ship?
Sir, finishing this fight.
Wait, whoa, hold on, what? That's it? That's the whole game? Yeah, that's the whole thing. The crunch Bungie went through to get this game through the door meant that they cut the last act of the game, the whole finale, the return to Earth and final showdown where the Chief and the Arbiter would fight side by side. Instead, the game ends on a cliffhanger, leaving audiences high and dry coming out of the game's campaign. And this was an incredibly controversial move. People were completely upset that the game just stopped. You didn't get closure, you didn't get that final mission, things just suddenly ended. It wasn't the only controversial choice, though. The immediate reaction to the Arbiter's inclusion wasn't well received initially either. Some fans were upset that the story deviated too far from the Master Chief. I mean, for the last level of the game, you play as the Arbiter, not the Chief. But on the flip side, the Arbiter's story opened up plenty of new storytelling opportunities. Halo 2 was able to go so much farther than its predecessor by including this whole side. And critical reception to the campaign was top tier. Critics praised the gunplay, skyboxes, pretty much every aspect was adored by major outlets. And if there's any solace in the sudden cliffhanger, it means that Halo 2 can't be the grand finale to the series. As much as Bungie wanted this to be the ultimate final chapter to close out their run in this universe, this cliffhanger guaranteed that there had to be another game. They had to make Halo 3. This was also compounded by the fact that there was a brief post-credits scene. For a brief moment, we return to High Charity. We see flood spores having infected every corner of the structure. The Gravemind has completely taken over the city. But he's not alone, as he begins a very confrontational conversation with who else but Cortana.
I will ask, and you will answer.
All right. Shoot.
And that right there is Halo 2. It had big shoes to fill going up against its predecessor, but it continued and advanced things in hugely exciting ways and gave audiences plenty of stuff to chew on as a result. And like the first game, this one was also endlessly replayable. Once again, you could set the campaign to one of 4 difficulties, and that not only made the game harder or easier, but it also gave some variety in dialogue. Some cutscenes featured different lines based on the difficulty you selected, making every run of the game just that little bit different.
You had your chance to be afraid before you joined my beloved corps. But to guide you back to the true path, I brought this motivational device. Our big green style cannot be defeated.
What about that scare?
We've all run the simulations. They're tough, but they ain't invincible. Usually the good Lord works in mysterious ways, but not today. This here is 66 tons of straight up, HE spewing divine intervention. If God is love, then you can call me Cupid.
What about that scare?
We've all run the simulations. They're tough, but they ain't invincible.
But the difficulty settings weren't all that could make the game harder this time, because Halo 2 also introduced the concept of skulls. When playing on Legendary and Legendary only, you could find little skulls strewn across each level of the game. Upon acquiring them, you'd not only get an achievement, but you'd also get an effect that would hold true until you turned off your Xbox. Each skull had an attributed effect. Each one would change the game in a slightly different way to make it a bit harder. These effects included, but were not limited to, enemies will suddenly shoot their weapons faster, every enemy is now completely cloaked, making them much harder to see, AI will throw more grenades, the only way to heal is by killing something via melee, there's even a skull called I Would Have Been Your Daddy, which is based on both a mission heading from the last game and a random line you could get during the first game's campaign.
I'd have been your daddy, but that dog beat me over the fence!
And here, upon activating this skull, it dramatically increases your chances of hearing rare combat dialogue during missions. There were roughly 20,000 unique lines recorded for this game, and some of them appear very rarely. But with this skull, those lines could be brought to the forefront so you could hear all sorts of crazy things.
Here's to you, Mr. Green Armor wearing almost save the human race from extinction guy.
Now, each one of these skulls makes the game a bit harder, but if you want the ultimate challenge for Halo 2, you can find every single skull across the campaign, then select them all in the main menu, and play the game on Legendary with all skulls on. This challenge was called Lasso, and essentially gave the game a 5th difficulty setting: easy, normal, heroic, legendary, and mythic. So if you really want to test your mettle against the jackal snipers that you can barely see and can one-shot you, Lasso is the way to go. At the very least, you could once again play Halo 2 with a friend in split-screen co-op, which made the journey slightly easier. While Bungie did try their hardest to make playing the campaign online possible, it didn't ultimately work out. So if you wanted a friend to go through this story, split-screen was the only way to go. But the same was not true for the multiplayer. Halo 2 launched with Xbox Live capabilities right away, and it took off like wildfire. At every moment of every day, you could pop into a multiplayer lobby of Halo 2 and have an absolute blast. You not only had some familiar game modes from the first game, but they were also joined by a bevy of new modes and challenges to make multiplayer interesting and fresh. Combined with a grand total of 12 new maps at launch, Halo 2's multiplayer was a welcome location for anyone to get their gaming fix. If you had an Xbox at the end of 2004, you were no doubt spending countless hours in these lobbies, shooting at strangers or organizing parties with your friends. Once again, every game started players with the same 2 weapons, with a bunch of other guns strewn across the map. And customization got a major upgrade. Now, instead of just changing the color of your guy, you could change 2 colors on your guy. You could add emblems and little icons, weapons. Not to mention, following in the footsteps of the campaign, you could also don the look of an elite. It wasn't just Spartans against Spartans, elites were now in the mix to change up the fight all over again. While the customization options for them weren't as expansive, and players more often gravitated towards playing as Spartans, they were still a welcome addition. There were some chinks in Halo 2's multiplayer experience though, with lots of tips and tricks discovered that made the multiplayer significantly harder for casual fans. If you didn't know things like hitting the melee button to shorten your reload time, you might get flattened on the battlefield. Despite that, however, Halo 2 was the go-to multiplayer experience. Its game modes, its customization, its utilization of Xbox Live were revolutionary. Halo 2 ultimately defined what console multiplayer could be. So many of its features would wind up becoming universal across all of Xbox Live. That, coupled with the Xbox's strong internet connection, proved to provide plenty of hours of lifelong gaming memories. Halo 2 was absolutely insane. Not only was the day one launch the biggest retail hit in entertainment history, but the game would go on to sell tons of copies over its lifespan. In fact, total sales added up to 6.3 million copies sold in the US and 8.46 million copies around the world. Microsoft's promise for this to be a cultural event was fulfilled. There was nothing else like Halo 2 on the market. It absolutely took over. But there was still that lingering lack of satisfaction from the campaign. There was still a missing chapter at the end of all of this. So while Halo 2 dominated the Xboxes last year as perhaps the best game on the console, fans were eagerly waiting for more. They were eagerly awaiting the day that they could finish this fight. Bungie was burned out. The team was tired, overworked, and miserable. The Halo 2 development cycle damn near killed everyone involved, which is why for the first few months after Halo 2's release, all the team did was rest and try and make up for lost daylight hours in the last year. There were some small additions to Halo 2 in 2005. The multiplayer got some expansions with a multiplayer map pack, giving fans all new areas to battle it out on. This also came with a bonus cutscene for the campaign, titled Another Day at the Beach. Set during the level Outskirts, it follows the journey of the other Pelican that was shot down by the Covenant Scarab. You as the Master Chief were in one, these guys were in another. We follow UNSC commanders, marines, and some ODSTs as they make their way through the city trying to survive from Covenant forces. If you like the cinematic nature of Halo 2's cutscenes already, then here was another 3-minute sequence to give you just a tiny bit more, to fill out the Halo 2 story and make it feel a tiny bit bigger. But ultimately, as 2005 got underway and the fires of Halo 2 were slowly dissipating, everyone involved was in a state of recovery. Bungie's CEO Jason Jones went on sabbatical following Halo 2's release. The development of the game almost killed him, and he decided to step away to figure out if he really wanted to make games anymore. Ultimately, even upon his return to Bungie, his involvement in Halo's future was minimal. Instead, he began to construct a whole new universe. It's almost like it was his destiny or something. Joseph Staten also took an extended holiday. He'd come to a bit of a disagreement with some other people on the direction the Halo story was going to go, so he decided it was best for everyone if he ultimately walked away for a while. Instead, he'd become the unofficial head of the Halo universe, working on other projects for the franchise separate from the main story. In fact, he'd worked directly with Peter Jackson and eventually Neil Blomkamp to produce a Halo movie. And there were ideas for another video game project with Peter Jackson, completely separate from the story of the Master Chief. So, 2 major leads on the first 2 games were out, leaving the rest of the team to pick up the pieces. At first, it wasn't really clear who was in charge. For a second, it seemed like Max Hoberman would be made the lead on Halo 3, but he felt his place was with the multiplayer, so that's where he stayed. The team was a little bit aimless going into the next game. Some people at Bungie were growing a little sick of Halo. Not only did they want Halo 2 to be the end, but they really didn't want to be a machine that's whole existence revolved around churning churning out an endless series of Halo games. And that came in direct conflict with Microsoft. They, of course, saw the immense value and profitability of the franchise, and wanted to see it continue for as long as it was successful. Couple that with the fact that Bungie wanted better profit sharing after the immense success of Halo 2, and the developers and publishers were in a bit of a conflict. Bungie wanted to regain their independence. They wanted to separate from Microsoft to make new original games again. But Microsoft wanted Halo to keep going in perpetuity. Ultimately, a deal was struck between the two companies. Microsoft would let Bungie go independent, but they'd have to provide 3 more Halo games. While Bungie wanted Halo 3 to be their last hurrah, it was instead going to be the first of 3 games to close out their run. But Bungie agreed. They wanted their independence, and this compromise was worth it. They just had to get their act together and actually get something sorted out for the next game. Which meant after a few-month break, the team at Bungie eventually decided to get back to work. It was time to finish the fight. A fight that came with one very exciting prospect. Halo 3 was going to be released on a next-generation console. At the end of 2005, Microsoft released their entry into the 7th console generation, the Xbox 360. Better graphics, better processing power, better resolution, all of it was a big upgrade compared to the original Xbox, and the team at Bungie was going to be able to utilize this upgrade in huge ways for Halo 3. But with better hardware comes more work. Textures would have to be more detailed, higher resolution meant that you could see more, so more had to be accounted for. The visual upgrade was exciting, but in order to fulfill it, the team had a lot of work ahead of them. But upgrading the visuals for Halo 3 wasn't the only thing the team had on their minds, because they also had to ask themselves one immensely important question. What's the story? Over the first year of development on Halo 3, there were plenty of ideas thrown around as to what the story could be. It's not like they could just take the cut levels from the end of Halo 2 and put them in a new box. They didn't really exist in that form. Also, Joseph Staten, the one behind a lot of Halo 2's design, was still out of the office. He knew every plotline in Halo 2 back to front. He's the one who knew exactly where he wanted it to go. But with him out, it was left to everyone else to pick up the pieces and form a story based on where they left off. Master Chief and the Prophet of Truth were returning to Earth. The elites had broken off from the Covenant. The Arbiter had teamed up with Sergeant Johnson, Miranda Keyes, and 343 Guilty Spark, and Cortana was still captive aboard the flood-infested High Charity. All of this needed to be followed up on. All of this needed a conclusion. Eventually, a written-by-committee outline was presented, featuring a rough beat-for-beat overview of what the game could be. While many at Bungie were pretty happy with it, Martin O'Donnell didn't think it'd work at all. According to him, the story had no shape to it. It had no stakes. It even completely omitted significant characters from Halo 2 like Lord Hood and Miranda Keyes. It felt like the outline was backtracking in some ways, trying to recapture the magic of the first Halo, whilst undoing what the team was critical of in Halo 2. But that's not what the fans would want. You can't undo or backtrack what you did, you have to be moving forward. So, Martin O'Donnell thought long and hard about how to make Halo 3 satisfying. For one thing, the stakes needed to be huge. This wasn't just another game, this was the grand finale to a trilogy. Everything needed to be at stake, even the Master Chief. But how do you make it feel like Master Chief could be at risk? He's a superhero. Well, thanks to the fact that Martin O'Donnell had just watched the movie Serenity, a movie that makes you believe that anyone, even the principal characters, could die, he came to a simple conclusion. Halo 3 needed death. Only by killing a few principal characters would it feel like even the Master Chief wouldn't get out unscathed. And so, after presenting some new plot ideas to the team, the whole story wound up being rewritten from the ground up. Using Martin O'Donnell's ideas, Halo 3 took on an all-new shape. And eventually, after a new outline was made, Joseph Staten rejoined the Halo 3 team, and worked to flesh out and expand on the ideas with more detail and dialogue. With all of this finally in place, the team had agreed on the direction Halo 3 would take. The whole thing was moving forward now. The story was underway, the development was off and running, which meant it was time to begin the promotion game. In May 2006, like clockwork, E3 had come around once again. Like a lot of the other big studios, Microsoft had a huge 90-minute press conference, revealing and teasing their upcoming games for the next year, continuing the ongoing lifespan of the Xbox 360 into its second year and beyond. But while there was plenty to be excited about during the conference, the real heavy hitter came at the very end. For the last few minutes of the press conference, Microsoft unveiled an all-new teaser trailer. It all starts with a nice HD landscape shot. That already got people excited, but the cheering really kicked off when the shot was occasionally interrupted by flashing images, revealing haunting voiceover from the still captive Cortana. All before the real showstopper, the reveal of Master Chief, back in action once again. The scale was immense, the music by Martin O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore managed to bring out the epic feel of the whole thing, the presentation was top tier, the mystery of the structure being revealed beneath the Earth's surface raised tons of questions, Master Chief's armor looked better than ever, the environments looked fantastic, and the whole thing ended with the simple message, finish the fight. It was only a glimpse, but it was enough to get fans excited. Bungie was coming back. Halo was coming back. The King had returned. The excitement coming out of this was palpable. The cliffhanger ending to Halo 2 was finally going to be resolved in one of the most anticipated gaming events of all time, which meant the team at Bungie had a lot to live up to. The question was, how do you improve the gameplay for Halo 3? Bungie had nailed down a lot of things in the first two games. Gunplay was fun, movement was fun, the enemies were fun, but just repackaging the same stuff wasn't going to be all that satisfying. There needed to be some new ideas to separate Halo 3 from its predecessors and continue to reinvent the wheel. So the team at Bungie created about a half-dozen major ideas to explore, with the idea being that maybe 2 of them would be implemented in the final game. There were new weapons added, some new enemy types like transforming flood creatures. There was even a huge expansion to the Scarabs. The Scarab in Halo 2 was really nothing more than a scripted set piece. It looked cool, but there wasn't much interesting going on with it on a gameplay level. So they were set to have a huge overhaul for Halo 3. They'd have their own AI, they'd roam around the battlefield, and you as a player would have to find out exactly how to take it down on your own. But more than any of that, the most expansive overhaul came with the Brutes. The Brutes in Halo 2 were a little undercooked. They were bullet sponges. There wasn't much to them that made them interesting or fun to shoot at. So this time, they'd be given unique armor, specific subclasses, as well as unique weapons and vehicles to separate them and make them just as interesting to fight as the Elites. Which is good because given the fact that the Elites had broken off from the Covenant, they wouldn't be an enemy type this time around. Halo 3 was going to be all Brutes all the time. The thing was though, even though only 2 of these ideas were planned to go into the game, the team at Bungie were so invested into all 6 major ideas that every single one of them would make it into the final product. All 6 ideas would be there on store shelves to give Halo 3 a whole different feel than Halo 1 and 2. And some of these new changes were promoted towards the end of the year, kicking off with what Bungie called a VDoc, a video documentary, a 7-minute behind-the-scenes video detailing a specific aspect of the game during its promotion. VDocs would ultimately become a major source of promotion for Bungie, something that'd carry through for all of their future games. And first up was a VDoc about the Brutes, revealing to audiences for the very first time all of the changes Bungie was making to the Brutes to make them significantly more interesting to fight than they were in Halo 2. Classes, armor, weapons, a more pack-like mentality, all sorts of promises made by the team for fans to chew on and get excited about. But that was only the beginning of Halo 3's marketing push, because right at the end of the year, promotion really started to heat up. Like Halo 2, Microsoft had a mandate for Halo 3's marketing. This was more than just a video game. This was an event, which meant that the marketing had to not only sell this as something larger than life, but also get people to ditch their preconceived notions about what video games could be. Halo 2 was sold as an adrenaline-high, action-packed adventure, but Halo 3 took a decidedly different approach to its promotion, all of which kicked off on December 4th, 2006, because during ESPN's Monday Night Football, a 1-minute teaser trailer was released for Halo 3. Animated by Digital Domain and directed by Joseph Kosinski, this teaser is very simple. It starts with two children theorizing about what could be out there among the stars, all before smash cutting to the Master Chief in the midst of a battle, using a bubble shield and jumping into the fray like the action hero he is. There is action, but it's overall very simple. More than anything, it's really a call to action. Halo 3 is coming in 2007. You'd better be ready. It's also widely theorized that one of the two kids at the start is a young Master Chief, John himself. Ultimately, this kicked off the Halo 3 marketing campaign in a big way. A marketing campaign that'd carry audiences right into the year 2007. A lot of Halo 3's promotion kept the single-player campaign side of the game a relative secret. No one knew really anything yet about what the story could entail, how things were going to wrap up following Halo 2. The multiplayer, however, was a completely different story. Bungie revealed a lot of what they promised with Halo 3's online features. Things kicked off with December's Starry Night trailer. If players entered onto the Halo 3 website quickly enough after the trailer's release, they'd get brief access to Halo 3's multiplayer beta at the end of January. Yep, if you were at the right place at the right time, you could get your hands on Halo 3. But the barrier to entry for that was pretty high. I mean, if you weren't actively paying attention, it was really easy to miss. Thankfully, that was only Phase 1. Unfortunately, Phase 2 also had a high barrier for entry. If you played 3 hours of Halo 2 multiplayer at the right time, you'd get access to the Halo 3 beta. Again, if you didn't know it was happening, it was easy to miss. But Phase 3 of the beta was far more accessible. By purchasing a copy of Crackdown on release, you'd be able to select the Halo 3 beta through its main menu. This was quite controversial at first. You know, why attach the Halo 3 beta to a completely unrelated, maybe even bad game? Some critics even joked that what you were really buying was the Halo 3 beta, and then there was a free game attached. But it wound up working out pretty well. Crackdown got solid reviews, and the added publicity meant that more people were playing that game than they would have otherwise. And also, this phase of the Halo 3 beta was absolutely massive. Across its run, over 800,000 unique players engaged in the beta, playing a grand total of over 12 million hours between them. That's almost as long as this video. At the same time, another VDoc was released revealing Bungie's ambition and plans for Halo 3's multiplayer, giving fans even more to chew on and get excited about in the coming months. But Halo 3 wasn't the only game fans could chew on in 2007, because the previous installment, Halo 2, made its way to PC. Just like the first game before it, Halo 2 was ported to Windows Vista, and Windows Vista alone. Gotta make sure to keep the franchise with Microsoft, am I right? And this brought all of the same wonder and awe that came with the original game, with slightly sharper cutscenes, some decent key binding to bring across the controller's interface to a mouse and keyboard, although overall it wasn't a spotless port. It lacked some features from the original game, and the dedicated online servers weren't as polished as they could have been. But for those who wanted to engage in the world of Halo with a mouse and keyboard, and get caught up before Halo 3 released later in the year, this was the place to go. But for most people, they were going to stick with their Xbox copy of Halo 2, and spend the rest of their time eating up the continuing promotional efforts for Halo 3. Promotional efforts that were absolutely enormous. Halo 3 had one of the most expansive and expensive promotional efforts for a video game ever. Costing $40 million, Microsoft were putting all their eggs in this basket. Halo 3 was the most anticipated video game title of the year, perhaps the most anticipated entertainment property of the year, and Microsoft took many routes to promote it as the year continued. For one thing, right after the beta came to a close, fans began to get introduced to an all-new viral marketing campaign. Just like Halo 2 before it, Halo 3 would also involve players in an ARG that'd take them across an in-universe story leading up to the game's release. This time around, it was orchestrated and kicked off on Bungie.net by Frank O'Connor. Frank O'Connor had been working with Bungie since 2003, being part of community relations prior to Halo 2's release. But now, his role was going to get a lot bigger, and a lot more impactful to the ongoing universe. He took to Bungie.net's forums as the AI character Adjutant Reflex, to get active fans to get involved in an all-new viral marketing campaign codenamed Iris. This time around, it's centered around various Forerunner hieroglyphs, this one in particular, which looks a little bit like an iris. People could uncover these symbols across various parts of Halo 3's promotion, as well as a live protest in Times Square. That's crazy. Through investigation and research, people were able to uncover a deeper story surrounding these symbols, a story that provided a great expansion to the Forerunners themselves. There was a comic that showed the Forerunners visiting Earth 100,000 years ago to build a superstructure under the surface. The same superstructure that appeared during Halo 3's initial announcement trailer, heavily theorized to be the Ark itself. Combine all of that with the reveal that Adjutant Reflex was actually a code name. His real name was Mendicant Bias, a powerful AI who turned against the Forerunners in their darkest hour. It was a huge expansion into the ongoing lore of the franchise, and something that gave a lot of insight into the Forerunners while still not giving the whole game away. The true identity of the Forerunners was still quite mysterious. But despite all this diving into the history of the Forerunners with glyphs, videos, voice recordings, the ARG didn't quite have a definitive conclusion, at least not in the same way the I Love Bees campaign did in 2004. Instead, the Iris campaign was left open-ended so that Halo 3 proper could close out the whole thing. This was a bit disappointing, or at least a little confusing to some people involved, as it seemed the campaign just stopped after a while without any proper resolution. But it did lead directly into the story of Halo 3. It set the stage for those paying close attention, and it began to open the floodgates for the further expansion of the Halo universe. Following that, Bungie also made an appearance at E3 in July 2007, or at least a scaled-down version of E3. There was a lot of politics behind the event this year, but Bungie made their mark, opening the floodgates for Halo 3 promotion with an all-new trailer.
Your world will burn until its surface is but glass.
For the first time, Bungie pulled back the curtain a little bit on Halo 3's campaign, showing off real in-game cinematics and gameplay, some hints towards the story, and backing it all with Martin O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore's new main theme. Scale was on full display in this trailer. Things were bigger than ever. This was a war, an ongoing conflict that has never been seen before in these games. And on top of all of that, fans of Halo 2 were greatly excited by the fact that Master Chief and the Arbiter would team up during this game's story. Together, they'd face off against the last leg of this fight. Halo fans were over the moon. The last stretch of promotion was underway, and with the release date set for September 25th, 2007, the last few months were chock full of promotional efforts. Efforts that would go on to define Halo 3's impact on pop culture as a whole. Another VDoc was released, this time revealing some more multiplayer details, specifically with two all-new features, Theater Mode and Forge. Theater Mode allows you to look back on any of your games and go really in-depth on how things happened on a replay level, and Forge allows you to edit and alter existing multiplayer maps to change the entire flow of the gameplay. In one of the more inventive marketing efforts, Neil Blomkamp was responsible for directing 3 live-action short films, with visual effects by Weta Digital, all under the title Landfall. For the very first time, Halo went live action with a series of short war movies essentially, featuring boots-on-the-ground footage of UNSC Marines and ODSTs fighting off against the Covenant in a high-stakes encounter during the War for Earth. And finally, in the last leg of Halo 3's promotional efforts came one of the most influential and most famous parts of the game's promotion, the Believe campaign. Instead of going hog wild into the adrenaline rush, these trailers were far more somber. Directed by Rupert Sanders, these were all in-universe live-action trailers featuring interviews of former UNSC soldiers reminiscing about the war for humanity and specifically their experiences fighting alongside the Master Chief. Not only did these marketing efforts present the Master Chief as a legend unlike any other, but it presented the war of these games as a legitimate and serious historical event within this universe. You might be rolling around blowing up spaceships and stuff, but these trailers really got you into the nitty-gritty of how it impacted everyone else, all the while making you, the Master Chief, out to be the ultimate legend of humanity. Perhaps the most inventive side of this campaign came in the diorama trailer, featuring a whole live-action diorama of a battlefield frozen in time, all centering around the Master Chief. There was even an in-universe behind-the-scenes video about the creation of the diorama, taking information from the real battle site to recreate the image as accurately as possible. Halo 3 had one thing on its mind during promotion. It wanted to be taken seriously. As much as this was the big action game of the year, it was also a cultural event, and one that could hold up to the same scrutiny as any blockbuster movie. Which meant only one thing. The team at Bungie had to live up to it. Thankfully, the development on Halo 3 was significantly easier than Halo 2. The team wasn't killing themselves to get Halo 3 through the door. There was still a crunch at the end, but it wasn't absolutely devastating like it was last time. There weren't any major cuts this time. Instead, it was all just a final push to get the game through the door and onto store shelves. Every team worked in tandem, pushing their way towards their collective goal. Testing, sound, music, all of it worked to the bone to get the game done. At the same time, voice work was being recorded and worked in. Once again, Halo 3 featured a bevy of talent behind the voices. Steve Downes and Jen Taylor are back as Master Chief and Cortana, respectively. Keith David is back as the Arbiter. Robert Davi is back as the Shipmaster. Ron Perlman is back as Lord Hood. And they're also joined by Terrence Stamp, taking over as the Prophet of Truth, the last remaining leader of the Covenant. On top of that, there is plenty of bonus voice talent, voicing the numerous UNSC and Covenant forces, with a whopping 35,000 unique voice lines between them. Every character can say a variety of different things according to anything the player might do. It's crazy. And with all of this work put into the game, eventually the entire team came to the end of the line. Halo 3 had gone gold. The game was complete. Bungie had finished the fight. Which meant it was now time for one of the biggest launch events for a video game ever. Promotions across the country had gone hog wild. Not only had the marketing gotten people excited, but you also had toys and merchandise, even a product tie-in campaign with Mountain Dew. They put Master Chief in the soda. And across the entire country, over 10,000 stores hosted midnight launch events. People were lined up around the block all over the country. It had been almost 3 years since the release of Halo 2, and fans were more ready than ever to jump back into the Mjolnir armor and complete Master Chief's story once and for all. And they could do it in a variety of different ways. I mean, sure, you could buy the standard Xbox 360 copy of the game, but what if you wanted something a bit more extravagant? Well, you could buy the limited collector's edition copy of the game, featuring a second disc with bonus behind-the-scenes material, and notoriously a case with a bad disc holder, which meant that up to 30% of all discs wound up being dislodged and potentially scratched beyond use. Whoopsies. At least that wasn't the only edition you could buy, because if you wanted to put down a whopping $130 plus tax, you could buy the Halo 3 Legendary Edition. Not only did this come with the game and a second disc featuring behind-the-scenes information, it also came with a Legendary DVD, featuring every cutscene from Halo 1 and 2, with optional commentary from Joseph Staten, Jason Jones, and Martin O'Donnell. It came with a stand that you could hold your discs inside of, and all of that could be covered by a slightly scaled down version of Master Chief's helmet. This was the real showstopper. If you were a true die-hard Halo fan, this was the thing you were picking up. No question. And thanks to all of this, like Halo 2, the first day sales for Halo 3 were absolutely insane. Across its first 24 hours, Halo 3 made $170 million off of sales. Once again, more money than any movie had earned over its opening weekend. For the time, Halo 3 was the most successful entertainment property of all time. It was absolutely unmatched. But now the game was flying off store shelves. Players had it in their hands, which meant there was only one thing left to do. It was time to slide that disc into the Xbox 360 and experience the last chapter in the Master Chief story. The clock had finally turned to September 25th, 2007. I hope you're ready, because the time has come to finish the fight. There's no time to waste. Halo 3 picks up right after Halo 2's cliffhanger. Master Chief has crash-landed on Earth, soon to be found by Sergeant Johnson and, wouldn't you know it, the Arbiter.
Got enough to worry about without you two trying to kill each other.
Were it so easy.
From the first minutes, we're off and running for this final chapter in Master Chief's story. You will go across the largest set pieces in the series so far, fighting alongside the Arbiter in the last missions for the entire trilogy. The Prophet of Truth has arrived on Earth. He's begun to uncover this enormous structure under the surface in Africa, and it's your job to stop him from activating all of the Halo rings and destroying the galaxy. And just like the first two games, Halo 3 comes ripping and roaring with a boatload of fun gameplay. For one thing, the guns are still incredibly well balanced, even including the return of the assault rifle and Magnum for the first time since Halo CE, alongside Halo 2's battle rifle and SMG. Some other old familiar favorites are back as well. The sniper rifle is back, the shotgun is back, the rocket launcher is back, that's fun. But this game also offers some new toys. You got the Spartan laser, which can decimate artillery in one shot when it's fully charged. You even get a flamethrower at one point, which is great for handling the return of the Flood partway through the campaign. Some Covenant weapons also make a comeback. Plasma rifle, Needler, energy sword, Covenant carbine, even the fuel rod gun makes a comeback. Enemy AI is still top-notch. The Covenant can still do all sorts of different things on the battlefield, from the traditional strategic stuff we've seen in the previous games to new ideas like suicide grunts. Grunts holding 2 active plasma grenades to blast you into oblivion. But then you have the biggest upgrade to the enemy sandbox, the Brutes. Like the elites before them, they now have their own classes. They have destructible armor, they even have all new behavior on the battlefield. To separate them a bit from the elites, there are a lot more of these guys during enemy encounters. This is in part because an individual brute is not quite as strong as an elite, but it's also because of their pack mentality. If one brute's gonna do something, the other brutes in that group will follow suit. They always work together, and if you damage them enough, they'll start to charge. On top of all of that, they've got some new toys to give them their own unique place in this game's sandbox. You got the Spiker, which shoots a bunch of spikes at enemies in rapid fire. You got the Mangler, this shotgun-like weapon that can decimate foes, both of which are some of the few weapons that can still be dual-wielded. Yes, dual-wielding is still a thing in this game, but it's toned down quite a bit. There are far less weapons that can be dual-wielded this time, also that the player will keep switching between weapons and use grenades more often, which were almost obsolete last time. But by far the most fun toy for the Brutes is the Gravity Hammer. This thing is a beast. Not only is it terrifying in the enemy's hand, but once you get it in your hand, the entire battlefield becomes prey to your onslaught. But brutes don't just have new weapons, they also have a couple new vehicles to help define themselves within this world. I mean, you got the Prowler, which is essentially the brute's answer to the Warthog. One person in the driver's seat, the other in the turret seat. Then you have the brute vehicle you come across the most during the campaign, the Chopper. This motorcycle of death with a giant wheel in front. You do not want to get on the business end of this thing, let me tell you. Did you see that? The Chopper tore through the battlefield, absolutely decimating that mongoose with not a second to lose. All that was left was a burning carcass. Truly devastating. The Mongoose, of course, is a new UNSC vehicle, an ATV type thing to roll around the battlefield and have a ton of fun. Once you get a Marine on the back with a rocket launcher, you're a menace out there. It's great. The vehicle sandbox also includes a bunch of familiar sets of wheels. I mean, we got the Warthog, still fun as ever to drive. It even has a troop carrier variant, where you can have a bunch of Marines in the back tearing through the Covenant. The Ghost is back, sliding across the battlefield. You get access to a Wraith tank a couple times, and of course there are a couple moments where you get a Scorpion tank. The first Scorpion sequence is pretty great because some of the Marines fighting beside you will just become your cheerleader. You're the most powerful person on the battlefield and they'll make sure that you know.
Tank beats Ghost! Hunter! Tank beats Hunter!
But also, this game sees the UNSC get some time in the air. The last two games had the Banshees for the Covenant, but now we see the opposition's approach to the skies with the Hornet. You got bullets, you got missiles, you can become the king of the skies. But on top of the vehicles and weapons, there's also a new mechanic introduced in Halo 3, equipment. For the first time, you can pick up usable equipment across every level of the game, allowing you to change the battlefield in subtle ways and come up with new strategies. You got the drop shield, which can change up where you can take cover. A bubble shield can keep you and some friendly AI out of harm's way. There's even a power drain to decimate nearby enemies. On top of that, the game adds 2 new grenade types. You have the Brute Spike Grenade, which functions almost identically to a plasma grenade. Then there's the Fire Grenade, which does exactly what it sounds like on the tin. And on top of all of that, there's one fantastic addition to Halo 3's gameplay sandbox that is an absolute game changer. Previously, in Halo 2, you could take control of mounted turrets across the area. There were even big, cumbersome turrets in the first game, but these were always stationary. They never left their spots. But now, in Halo 3, when you take control of a mounted turret, you have the ability to rip it off its base and carry it around the area, absolutely eviscerating Covenant, and that's awesome. A lot of the campaign is designed in such a way to make you feel powerful. You're the Master Chief, you're the legend, and you're gonna tear through everything. And that's helped a long way by the music. Once again, Martin O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore have teamed up to bring about an all-new but familiar sound to Halo. The first game's music was all about being mysterious. You're uncovering the secrets of Halo, and the music reflects that in a lot of ways. The second game's music was all about rock and roll. It's an action blockbuster from start to finish, and it's all about getting your adrenaline pumped up. And now, the third game's music is all about scale. This game is huge, it is epic in scope, and the music reflects that at every turn, most specifically in its use of the piano. The epic scale and scope comes in the emotional side of the score as well, because following in the footsteps of Halo 2, this game brings out some more emotional tracks, and it even features a reprise of the track Unforgotten from Halo 2. This time aptly titled Never Forget, which is a slightly longer and arguably even better version of the track than the original. And yes, don't you worry, there is another variant on A Walk in the Woods from the first game, this time simply titled Another Walk. At the same time, with the advent that Halo 3 is an Xbox 360 game, it winds up becoming the best looking one of the trilogy. I mean, there's always going to be a case to be made about the feel and atmosphere of the first game, and the ways the second game maxes out the original Xbox's capabilities, but in terms of textures and details, Halo 3's got them both beat. The animation is more intricate, the faces have a lot more motion, the textures are more detailed, the explosions especially are very dynamic. So many things in this game are destructible, and tearing them down is a load of fun. The skyboxes are once again insane. The first half of the campaign mostly takes place on Earth, and we see from a distance as the Forerunner ship sits at the center of this huge metal structure. Just watching from a distance as this area is uncovered is mesmerizing, with Covenant ships flying over it, glassing the area. But things really kick into gear in the second half of the campaign, because it's revealed that this structure under the Earth's surface is not the Ark. It instead activates a portal to the Ark. And upon jumping through, we see this enormous structure built by the Forerunners that is so large the central circle is able to create entire Halo rings. Those things were already big, which means this thing must be absolutely staggering. And as you walk along, you see the structure in the distance. You feel like a tiny speck. You can even see the Milky Way galaxy in the sky, letting us know we are not in Kansas anymore. But where Halo 3 really hits its stride is in its presentation, the cinematic moments that are littered across the campaign. Not only do you have standard cutscenes that play every once in a while, the game also introduces these small vignette scenes, featuring real-time assets doing custom animations, all to further the story in a way that gives you a quick breather, but doesn't keep you away from the shooting for too long. On top of that, there are multiple encounters with the all-new Scarabs. These things looked neat last time, but they're full-fledged set pieces now, and anytime they enter a scene, it's an event.
Scarab! Find some cover! Now!
There's even a moment where you take on 2 Scarabs at once, in a set piece that allows you to go about it any which way. I chose to soar overhead in a Hornet, ogling the carnage from a distance. Then you have the big story-driven moments. The moments that, when they arrive, they send you to the back of your seat in awe. Like the arrival of the UNSC frigate, the Forward Unto Dawn. A moment which quite literally lifts you from the ground.
Is the Dawn rated for atmosphere?
Guess we're gonna find out. Take cover!
Then you have a moment like the reveal that the Ark has been constructing an all-new Halo ring, a replacement for Installation 04, the ring you destroyed in the first game. It's not even done building yet, and the scale of it is insane. Halo 3 also brings along an all-new feature that was never seen before in the previous 2 games. This time around, when searching through hidden nooks and crannies of the campaign levels, you could find terminals that told the story alongside the main game. These terminals were text only, revealing new details and expanding the universe. But they weren't just about giving some more depth to Halo 3, they also provided a concrete resolution to the Iris alternate reality game. Participants of the Iris campaign were initially confused by its rather sudden and unresolved ending, but now they could complete the picture with a series of terminals hidden across Halo 3. Combined with the main blockbuster story Halo 3 was telling, audiences could finally get the sense of finality they were so desperately looking for. It's not a stretch to say that Halo 3 is pretty damn good. I mean, there's lots going for this game overall. But is it perfect? Well, no. There are several areas where the game falls a little short of its predecessors. One of the big things is that very little happens in the first half of the game. As a consequence of this being expanded from the cut levels in Halo 2, you don't do all that much in the first 5 levels. You go to a place, shoot some guys, take out a turret, and that's half the game over and done with. It isn't until the Flood returns in the 6th level that things really start to heat up, where it really starts to feel like you're fighting for the fate of the galaxy. From then on, it kills. On top of that, while the cutscenes here are still fun, they're not quite as good as Halo 2's cutscenes. The Halo 2 cutscenes were hugely cinematic, featuring great camera movements and a lot of great filmic language. A lot of that isn't really here this time. It's a little bit more pedestrian in its direction. The Prophet of Truth is also not quite as good as he was in Halo 2. I think Terrence Stamp is doing a fine job taking over the voice, but there's nothing really beating Michael Wincott's voice from the last game.
Soon the great journey shall begin. But when it does, the weight of your heresy will stay your feet, and you shall be left behind.
Cowering in the dirt, thinking, what, I wonder, that you might escape the coming fire? No, your world will burn until its surface is but glass.
But there's also the change in characterization. The Prophet of Truth in the last game was a villain, but he was more methodical in his approach. He was more conniving and reserved in his villainy. But here he's more like a raving lunatic from start to finish. The more nuanced approach is lost in favor of a maniacal adversary you gotta take out. As another step down from Halo 2, the Arbiter is more of a side character here. I think it's fine that you exclusively play as the Master Chief in this story, but the Arbiter as a result loses a lot of his agency. He had a whole story last time, but since some fans didn't like his inclusion and the focus he took away from Master Chief, he's more just along for the ride this time around. The dialogue isn't quite as good either. There are less quotable moments this time. Now, there are a few good moments, but nothing hits the same highs as the Shakespearean dialogue prevalent in Halo 2. Instead, a lot of that is replaced with lines like this.
Ma'am, squad leaders are requesting a rally point. Where should they go?
To war.
Alright. Can someone find me the coordinates for war here real quick? And then you have probably the most frustrating aspect of the game, which is impacted by its importance to the story, the Cortana interruptions. Cortana is still trapped on the Flood-infected High Charity, and her absence haunts Master Chief. So, a few dozen times during the campaign, you will be stopped in your tracks to view a haunting message from Cortana. Given that Cortana was one of the best characters in the last 2 games, her absence for most of this game is definitely felt. But given the fact that you're physically stopped every time one of these messages plays, they wind up being more annoying than interesting, especially on a second playthrough.
This is UNSC AI serial number CTN0452-9. I am a monument to all your sins.
So overall, there are things that hold Halo 3 back, despite it being a very fun game. But all of this leads to the immensely important question. After all of the marketing for the game, after the cliffhanger ending of Halo 2, how do we actually finish the fight? Well, Halo 3 brings back a bunch of the characters from the first 2 games. I mean, we already have Master Chief and the Arbiter, but we also have Sergeant Johnson, Miranda Keyes, Lord Hood, even the Shipmaster and 343 Guilty Spark rejoin the party. And all of them are taking part in an all-out war against the Covenant and the Flood. So many set pieces are filled to the brim with allies and enemies. Carnage and destruction are around every corner, both on Earth and on the Ark. It's the grand finale, and this game knows it. Despite some of the downgrades with the cutscenes compared to Halo 2, once the stakes start becoming clear and the scale of the game really comes through, Halo 3 brings out some sick moments, like this bit with the Shipmaster.
Brute ships, staggered line. Shipmaster, they outnumber us 3-1.
Then it is an even fight.
But it wouldn't be a grand finale, an all-out war, without some casualties. As established by Martin O'Donnell, this game does see a few characters die throughout its story. Miranda Keyes is killed by the Prophet of Truth, Sergeant Johnson is killed very suddenly by 343 Guilty Spark, and in response, you kill the Monitor yourself. The question is, do these deaths work? Like, on a dramatic level, do they work? Well, no. Like the to war moment earlier, these deaths, especially Miranda's, were heavily ridiculed. Mainly because there's no real dramatic push behind the deaths themselves, and a lot of contrivances have to occur in order for the deaths to happen. Like with Miranda's death, her death scene sees her trying to save Sergeant Johnson from the Covenant. She already has access to a full UNSC army, and she's also sent Master Chief and the Arbiter in to save Johnson already, but despite that, she flies in with a Pelican completely alone and stands amidst the Covenant without armor. Ultimately, the reaction to the death is less, oh no, she's gone, and more, of course you're dead, that was really kind of dumb what you did just then. At least Johnson's death hits harder with the shock value, and he does get at least a couple lines for his send-off, and it is at the very least sad to see these characters go. But while the deaths don't really stick the landing, there are other aspects to the ending, the things that really needed to land, that absolutely do. Because to round out the story, this game closes out all 3 major storylines of the entire trilogy. Starting with story number 1, The War Against the Covenant. The level, simply known as The Covenant, might be the crowning achievement of not just this game, but the entire trilogy. The whole thing starts with a beach run like the start of the Silent Cartographer level from the first game. There are grunts, jackals, brutes, everything all over the place. You get some warthog time, you get some scorpion time, you get some hornet time, you fight beside elites and the Arbiter, all in the final stretch to stop Truth from activating the Halo array. And in the final push, for a brief moment, you even fight alongside the Flood. For just one set piece, the Flood's goals align with yours, and you see yourself charging in with them and the Arbiter to take down Truth, which all leads to the climactic moment where the Arbiter completes his quest, killing Truth and ending the Covenant as we know it.
I am Truth, the voice of the Covenant!
So, you must be silenced.
Unfortunately, the truce with the Flood doesn't last long. With Truth dead, the Gravemind turns on you once again, which means you gotta fight your way back out of this tower. But it does give us this cool shot of Master Chief and the Arbiter standing back to back, ready to take on the Flood together.
Betrayed one villain for another.
But now, with the Flood attacking you again and Installation 08 revealed, it's time to head into the second conclusion, story number 2, the Chief and Cortana love story. Now, it's not a traditional love story by any means, but there is a connection there that was founded in the first game and given lots of time to shine in the second game.
You look nice.
Thank you.
A part of Chief has been missing for this entire story, and this is the moment where you're set to get it back. It's up to you to break into High Charity and save Cortana. It's unfortunate that this is by far the worst level of the game. I don't know if it's the worst level of the trilogy, the library might still claim that crown, but this one gets close, at the very least. For one thing, the Cortana interruptions are dialed up to 11. They're even made worse with additional Gravemind interruptions, 2 separate characters stopping you in your tracks and killing the flow of gameplay. On top of that, the level looks nothing like High Charity from Halo 2. I mean, to be fair, this one wasn't designed with High Charity in mind. It was really supposed to be the inside of a standard Covenant cruiser. But it's unfortunate that the cool design ideas present in Halo 2 don't make the leap to Halo 3. And then, of course, you have the real hard-hitting truth about this level. It is relentless. Without even giving a moment to build tension, you're already thrust into the action. You fight waves and waves of Flood. And once you defeat those waves of Flood, you fight some more Flood. And after that, there's some more Flood. And then there's a bit more Flood after that. Oh, but here's a twist. After that, there's even more Flood. Not to mention, there's some more Flood. Also, the Flood have a new enemy type here. There's still the standard carrier forms, infection forms, and combat forms, but now you have pure forms. Creatures who can actually transform from one mode to another. They can be these little spindly spider creatures. They can also be these monstrous tanks that run around. Or, most annoyingly of all, they can turn into these projectile creatures and snipe at you from across the level. These guys are the worst. And it sucks because the Flood in this game might be the best they've ever been. Each individual Flood form is weaker, they're easier to kill, which is nice. This is balanced out by having more of them on the map, which makes them feel like an overwhelming presence, in a good way. The Flood here are at their coolest, until these projectile guys show up and try to ruin your whole day. They're incredibly tough, so it takes a lot to kill them, and their weapons are also tough, so it doesn't take much to kill you. It's just a whole mess of tedious gameplay. But while the gameplay of the level absolutely falls short, this level does feature great importance to the overall story, because towards the end of this level, after being separated since all the way back in Halo 2, Master Chief and Cortana are finally reunited.
You know me. When I make a promise.
You keep it. I do know how to pick 'em.
Lucky me.
Fans of this dynamic could rejoice. Master Chief and Cortana are back together at last. The dynamic that defined the first two games has returned. And now, with the Arbiter by their side, it's time to head off to complete the final leg of this journey with story number 3, the War Against the Flood. In the final level of the game, aptly titled Halo, you head onto the incomplete Halo ring, return to this very familiar location from the first game, and set the ring to activate. You're beyond the reach of the galaxy, beyond the reach of the other rings, so activating the ring here will only kill the Flood and rid them from the universe once and for all, while at the same time destroying the ring itself because it's incomplete. And after dealing with more Flood enemies, living through the death of Sergeant Johnson in 343 Guilty Spark, and activating the ring, you head into the final set piece. And how else would this trilogy end than with a Warthog run? Following in the footsteps of the first game, you and the Arbiter take off in a Warthog and rush through the last set piece as it explodes and crumbles all around you. The Halo theme blares through the speakers as you charge through the scene. Explosions, fireworks, a great look at the Ark in the distance, it's all extraordinary. It's action-packed, it gets the adrenaline pumping, it's not necessarily built on being difficult, but instead it tries to be the most exciting action climax it can be. Halo 2 might have proved that these games aren't the best at boss fights, but they're absolutely fantastic at vehicle gameplay. So why not end this trilogy where the whole thing began? Driving across an exploding landscape in a Warthog. You drive fast, you ram through enemies, and you make your way to the ship the Forward Unto Dawn, all to escape the ring before it fully ignites. And with a final leap into the ship's hangar, you manage to escape the ring. The ship is able to take off, the Arbiter in the captain's chair, and we watch as the Halo ring ignites, ending the Flood plague once and for all. The ship begins to fly towards the portal back to Earth as Master Chief and Cortana sit back, reveling in the ultimate conclusion to the whole shebang. But despite the victory, the conclusion of the game is a lot more bittersweet. As it turns out, only the front half of the Forward Unto Dawn made it back to Earth, carrying the Arbiter. Master Chief and Cortana never made it home. Now, a few months later, in March of 2553, humanity celebrates the end of the Human Covenant War. Lord Hood has made a truce with the Arbiter, the Flood have been defeated, ending their plague on the galaxy, and now the Arbiter has rejoined with the Shipmaster to break up what remains of the Covenant and lead forward into a new age of peace. All the while, the heroes of the war are remembered. Sergeant Johnson, Miranda Keyes, and even Master Chief.
Hard to believe he's dead.
Were it so easy.
But while the people of Earth suspect that the Master Chief might be lost forever, we discover that the back half of the Forward Unto Dawn was merely thrown into the sea of space. Master Chief and Cortana are not dead, just stranded. who knows how far away. And so, in the final moment, Master Chief heads into a cryotube to sleep off the inbound years until they're finally found, as the forward Unto Dawn drifts silently through the empty vacuum. All as a bookend to the first game. This whole thing started with Master Chief in a cryotube, and now it ends with him in a cryotube, to rest until the next mission.
Wake me when you need me.
And that right there is the end of Halo 3. What a ride. Across a not too long, not too short campaign, Bungie showed off scale and scope unlike anything they'd done before, and unlike most things in gaming for the time. Halo 3 was a blockbuster in every sense of the word, the ultimate conclusion to the Master Chief story, and an event in gaming all around. And its story did not disappoint. Despite some chinks in the armor, critics and fans were absolutely thrilled. The battles, the scope, the conclusive chapters to every story in the trilogy, it was all wrapped up in a satisfying way, and finally gave closure to the cliffhanger nearly 3 years ago. And like the first two games, Halo 3 was endlessly replayable. Once again, you could change the difficulty settings from easy, normal, heroic, and legendary, all to grant yourself a new challenge anytime you started the game. And like Halo CE before it, upon beating the game on legendary, you got a bonus scene after the credits. Despite how conclusive the ending was, there was a brief tease to something that might come next, as this final scene depicts the forward Unto Dawn still drifting through space, but arriving at what appears to be a massive Forerunner planet. Oh boy, Master Chief's gonna be in for one rude awakening when he learns about that. Halo 3 also brought back skulls from Halo 2. If you play the game on any difficulty from normal or higher, skulls can be found in every level, once again changing the way the game plays. Like one skull that makes it so that your overshield only recharges if you punch an enemy, another skull will take away your motion tracker, another will make enemies super grenade happy, they'll just start throwing them like nothing. And then you once again have the I would have been your daddy's skull, which increases the chances of getting rare combat dialogue during the game, including but not limited to a Rooster Teeth cameo during the level Crow's Nest, which is fun.
Hey, open up!
Password.
What?
Need the password.
You gotta be kidding me. What password?
Password. They gave it out at the staff meeting 15 minutes ago.
Meeting? What meeting? I was out here.
Not supposed to let anyone in without it.
If the staff meeting just ended, no one outside is gonna know the freaking password. Now open up. We need ammo and the chief is out here.
Does he know the password?
He wasn't at the meeting either.
And like Halo 2, you could play Halo 3 on Legendary with all skulls on to complete the Mythic difficulty. Easily the hardest challenge the campaign has to offer. At the very least, the campaign can be made a bit easier by bringing some friends along. And I do mean friends, plural. Like Halo 1 and 2, this game does have 2-player split-screen co-op for the campaign, but it also has the ability through Xbox Live for 4 players to take on the campaign together. One player would take on the Master Chief, the second player would take on the Arbiter, and the remaining 2 players would take on the other elite commanders. Playing with 3 other people became a blast for Halo 3's campaign, especially when you added the benefit that you could do it online. Instead of purely being locked to split screen, you could connect with friends and play the campaign together in the comfort of your own home. The Halo 3 campaign experience was malleable, it was replayable, and it was immensely satisfying. Similar things can be said about Halo 3's multiplayer. Once again, this game rocked Xbox Live. You had a grand total of 11 maps on launch, 2 of which were remakes of classic maps from the first 2 games. You had a variety of game modes to choose from and all sorts of ways you could fight with or against your friends. But that's the standard stuff. Halo's done a lot of that before. What Halo 3 does differently, and something that keeps it above the pack, is that it introduces two huge new features for fans to play around with. One is Theater Mode. The game automatically records your play sessions both in campaign and multiplayer, and you can go back and fly around every game to see exactly how things went down. You have an awesome moment in a multiplayer game that you can't believe happened? Head into Theater Mode and replay it from every possible angle. Then, of course, you had Forge Mode, a mode lifted directly from Bungie's earlier Marathon games. Here, it allows you to manipulate existing multiplayer maps to your heart's content. You can't change the geography, but you can absolutely change where spawn points are placed, where the flags are placed in Capture the Flag. You can put crates, weapons, vehicles anywhere you choose, which meant that the multiplayer experience was incredibly customizable. You could alter existing games, or you could get inventive enough to create all new games. These two features were huge for Halo 3, and kept this game far above the pack. There was nothing like this on store shelves, and fans would keep coming back for weeks, months, even years on end. Halo 3 was an event, the ultimate concluding chapter to the most popular video game series of its time. In the first 12 days on sale, Halo 3 sold a whopping 3.3 million copies, and by the end of the year, the game had sold 8 million copies worldwide, making it the most successful video game of the year, and, following in Halo 2's footsteps, the most successful entertainment property of all time. At least for a little while. Across 7 years, Bungie created something big, something special in the gaming world. They not only told a pretty engaging story about a green space cyborg who fought aliens with his hologram girlfriend, but they managed to make it the highest grossing thing ever. Halo Combat Evolved revolutionized the first-person shooter genre on console, defining practically every FPS game to follow. Halo 2 furthered the first game's developments and added to them by practically inventing online multiplayer for console shooters. And Halo 3 perfected both sides with well-rounded gameplay, top-of-the-line multiplayer, and just an overall blast from top to bottom. The Halo Trilogy is one for the history books, a revolutionary series of games that not only defined 2 console generations, but an entire console. The Xbox is synonymous with Halo, and it will probably be that way forever. And I, for one, greatly enjoyed revisiting this trilogy, replaying through the best moments, the big events, and getting a look back into the immense hype and excitement for all 3 games. But the Halo story isn't over just yet. Bungie had a deal with Microsoft to make 3 games before they were able to go fully independent. Halo 3 was only the first. They still had 2 more to go. And I'm sure even without Bungie, Microsoft will want to keep this franchise up and running for as long as it can. The story of Halo will not end so simply and concretely. There is more for this franchise in the future. We may have finished the fight, but the journey will continue. In due time, we will be heading forward unto dawn.